Hello, everyone. I think we'll start. First off, I'd like to remind everybody at the table, when you speak, please make sure you push the button and let the green light come on so people online can hear us. I'm David Moeller. I represent Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt here. Welcome to a meeting of the Boston Region MPO Planning Organization. David, please call the roll.
MassDOT Seat 1.
It's David Moeller. I'm here.
MassDOT Seat 2.
John Bouchard, present.
MassDOT Highway Division.
John Romano, MassDOT Highway here.
MBTA.
Sandy Johnston, representing General Manager Phil Lang and the MBTA.
Massport.
Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
MAPC.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Morning, Brian Kane, Advisory Board to the MBTA.
Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins of the Advisory Council here.
City of Boston BTD.
Jen Rowe, representing Mayor Michelle Wu and the City of Boston.
City of Boston BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA representing Mayor Wu and the City of Boston.
At-large City of Everett.
Good morning, Jay Monty representing Mayor DeMaria and the City of Everett.
Morning. At-large City of Newton.
Ned Codd, representing Mayor Fuller.
At-large Town of Arlington.
John Alessi, representing Select Board Chair Eric Helmuth in the Town of Arlington.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Good morning, Erin Chute, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green from the Town of Brookline.
Good morning. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Ballantyne in the Intercore.
Good morning. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Yeah, we had advance notice that would be a little bit late, so I'll call that roll a little later. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing North Shore Task Force.
North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Melissa Tintopoulos, representing North Suburban Planning Council.
South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull.
Chris Diorio, representing Hull Select Board Chair Greg Gray.
Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Rentham.
Rachel Benson, representing Joe Botash, Chair of Rentham Select Board.
Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood.
Morning, Tom O'Rourke from the Town of Norwood, representing the Trick Sub-Region.
Morning. Federal Highway Administration. Do we have Federal Transit Administration?
Good morning, Kirsty Hostetter, representing FTA Region 1.
Good morning. And that calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I have a quick report today. The court case against FHWA's GHG rule has been decided, at least at the district court level, and FHWA lost. So there is, as of right now, no requirement for MPOs or UZAs to adopt GHG reduction targets. That doesn't mean we can't adopt one, okay? It just means there's no federal requirement and we don't have to submit anything to Federal Highway by a certain deadline. And that concludes my report, unless there are any questions. Seeing none, next item on the agenda is the Executive Director's report. Tegan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could go to the next slide. So first, just a very quick staffing update. We do have a new job posting out that is for the manager of the data management group. That's a newly formed team of data analysts and data scientists that are charged with advancing the agency-wide data development and data management initiatives to maintain healthy data activities with our agency. So it's a very important posting, and it's kind of a newly formed team with some of the existing staff and maybe growing from there. So please take a look and also go to our website careers page to see other active postings as well. Next slide. In terms of engagement, first, yesterday we held the quarterly meeting for the Intercore Committee Transportation Group. And at that meeting, we heard from the MBTA about the Silver Line Extension Study. And then we also heard discussion from Intercore municipalities at that meeting about federal grants, about capacity, and opportunities to pursue quick build projects. So it was a great conversation. And then also an engagement update. We also held a virtual meeting last week with members of Union Capital Boston, which is an organization that provides incentives to community members to encourage and remove barriers to civic engagement. This is the first partnership event we've held with them since we established a formal relationship with them, the purpose of which is to more effectively engage equity communities through our work. So at the event, we spoke about the MPO and our work with about 150 community members from Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, and other neighborhoods. And we gathered great feedback about concerns and priorities for transportation that will help us evolve our engagement for the development of the next long-range plan. So please reach out to Stella Jordan if you have any questions about the relationship with Union Capital Boston or any of our engagement activities. Next slide, please. So today's agenda looks short, but it is a rather big agenda despite that. In addition to a few action items to approve minutes and endorse a current TIP for federal fiscal years 24 to 28, an amendment, excuse me, the main item for today will be the discussion and a need for you all to make decisions on what we call the final scenario, and that's the scenario for the target funded portion of the TIP funds for the federal fiscal year 25 to 29 TIP. So just to emphasize that the scenario you're discussing today is for the target funded portion of the TIP, which is allocated to the MPO for your own solicitation, selection, prioritization, and programming process. And so that's a very big, important step to getting towards a full TIP. And we'll ask you to make decisions today so that we can process that as we need to, and so that we can get to a full TIP in a few weeks. Next week, if you can go to the next slide, please. We've added a meeting on the 11th. The next two meetings will be virtual. So we've added a meeting on the 11th next week, and that's where we'll hear presentations to get to the broader, more complete programming of the TIP, which the board needs to endorse. And those will be the presentations of the capital investment programs of the RTAs, the Regional Transit Authorities, the MBTA, and MassDOT. So those will be federally funded projects that also need to be included in the TIP and endorsed by this board. And then on the 18th, we will ask you to vote to release the entire compiled TIP document for public comment. And that'll include the target funding scenario we're talking about today, plus any of the RTA, MBTA, and MassDOT selected projects. And there will be other items on the agenda, but I wanted to at least make sure you had a sense of the TIP timeline over the next couple of weeks as there are very critical decision points being made. And that, Mr. Chair, is all I have.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Seeing none, we'll move on to
I have a
public
question,
comment.
David.
Oh, yes. Brian, go ahead.
I just wanted to express my opposition to the meeting next week. I know the schedules are what they are. There are MBTA board committee meetings at the same time. So, you know, some of us won't be able to participate, but I understand we have to do it. I just want to go on the record as not supporting MPO meetings the same time as MBTA board or committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments for Tegan? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is public comments, and as is our practice, we will take members of the General Court and Chief Elected Officials first. I believe online we have Representative Sicolo.
Thank you, Chair Moeller and members of the MPO. I'm Michelle Sicolo, the representative for Lexington, Woburn, and Winchester, and I'm here to advocate for the 4225 I-95 interchange design to be funded in the the federal fiscal year 26 TIP. This project is highly complementary to the ongoing project that Lexington has been supporting for the Complete Streets project, which it has invested more than $3.25 million into for Bedford Street, Hartwell, Complete Streets reconstruction. And it relates to an area of our community that we have upzoned for MBTA zoning. It's a highly trafficked area with 33,000 average daily trips, and a tremendous number of jobs, both biotech and high tech, and the Hanscom Air Force Base within close proximity. So Lexington's done a lot of things to reduce single occupancy vehicles, including creating a transportation demand management overlay district and reducing parking requirements in this district. And we run the Rev Shuttle with the 128 Business Council that also provides service to this area. But this is when we developed the 25% design recently, we identified that the background growth was going to exceed the interchange capacity. So the two projects really need to advance concurrently as much as possible. So Sheila Page, the town's assistant planning director, I believe is with you in person or at least online. So if you have further questions, I know that she can answer any of those details. But I really appreciate the opportunity to advocate for this important regional project and thank everyone who's involved in this process. Take care.
Thank you, Representative. Also online, I believe, is Representative Arena DeRosa.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the board and staff of the MPO. I will be brief because the two projects that my towns have asked me to advocate on, I think are on the way and have already gotten plenty of support from the board. So I appreciate that. But we are really concerned about what's going on Route 16 and 126. And there's money for design funds that we're asking for. And I just appreciate the attention to small towns. I know that it's a separate issue, but I was surprised when I joined the legislature that Chapter 90 does not take into account road usage. And I have small towns that are on the runway to Boston. And just to give you an example on why this project for downtown Sherburne is so important that you'll hopefully be supporting or are supporting, I understand. A town of 4,300 people has 18,000 trips of vehicles a day flooding through their downtown. So that project is going to make a big difference. Really appreciate the support. If there are any follow-up questions, I know that both our town managers have been in touch with the board, and we're here to help. But I just wanted to thank you all. And if there's anything I can do going forward, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I believe in the audience is Mayor Concanon. Mayor, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I am the newly elected mayor of the city of Woburn, assumed office in January. I'm joined here by my new planning director, John Cashel, and our consultant, Rich Benevento from Ty and Bond, to speak on the downtown Woburn Traffic Safety Improvement Project. And I'm here to make a strong statement that the city of Woburn is fully committed to this project. We intend to do whatever we need to work with this board to make this a reality. It is critically important to not only downtown Woburn, to the Woburn community and the region. It's utmost safety matter, as well as pedestrian access and other ancillary benefits. But I can assure you this is one of my very top priorities. One of the first meetings I had was about this project. We have rallied our team. We have the full support of the Woburn City Council. As recently as last week, they appropriated the funds necessary to get us along 25% design. We have a robust community outreach plan in place. We're embarking on that now. I do appreciate the support we've seen thus far from the MPO. It means the world to us, and I would just respectfully request that you continue with that support, continue to allow this project to move forward. It's, as I said, one of the top priorities in our community, and we cannot do it without your support. And we appreciate that very much. I do have Rich Benevento here, perhaps later on in the agenda. If you have further questions, he is available to answer any of those specific questions. But we do very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we do appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now we'll go to people who have signed up in the room, and then we will call people who have raised their hand online. So in the room is Richard J. McClatchy.
I'll defer to Zach McKeever.
Excellent. He was the second person signed up. Zach, whenever you're ready, please introduce yourself for the record. And if you have an affiliation, state it if you want.
Thank you, board members. My name is Zach McKeever. I am the president of the Metacomet Greenway Association. We are a proposed 17-mile trail, regional trail down in Walpole, Norfolk, Rentham, Plainville, and North Attleboro. I did have some time last week at the meeting to sort of introduce the project, so I won't take up too much of your time today, but I did want to put a face to my words, and I know that I also lost connection last week, and luckily Rich was there with me to sort of jump in. So we appreciate any support we can get for this design project and your consideration. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we will go online, and in the order they were presented to me. Mike Espejo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Espejo. I'm on the Select Board in Burlington. Also, thank you to the members of the MPO for giving me a few couple seconds here to advocate for design funds for our Wynn Street interchange in the center of town through the TIP program. This is a very important project for Burlington. We've long wanted to make our town center more safe for pedestrians and more friendly, walkable for businesses. And it's a very busy part of town. It goes right through the center of town. We finally have got some movement with our town center to make it a more walkable town village, because Route 3A, Cambridge Street, that goes right through the center of Burlington, it's a state road. It's finally going to be improved and resurfaced in bike lanes. So this would be a good time to kind of continue the momentum for a very dangerous section of town, to make it safer, to make it more affordable for businesses. And we've recently introduced housing to the area and look to add more to the future. So I appreciate any of your consideration for a very long awaited and long anticipated project for Burlington. We've really wanted to do this a long time, and appreciate all your support on anything you guys can do to help. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Next up is Christina Johnson.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to see you, albeit virtually, and members of the Boston MPO Board. For the record, my name is Christina Johnson, and I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the Town of Hudson. I'm also joined by the Deputy Director, Pam Helnick. I have a few remarks, little editorial remarks regarding the project and prioritization process and how it relates to our design pilot application to begin the next phase of design for the Mass Central Rail Trail. And in particular, I first would like to thank the MPO Board, in particular, Mr. Giambetti, for developing a design pilot program to help communities such as Hudson obtain this design funding to advance important transportation projects for their respective communities. And the operative word being for the region. This is a regional rail network that would ultimately connect the town of Berlin to the city of Waltham. And it's really my understanding that the programmatic intent here is to assist communities like Hudson, smaller communities with limited options to leverage design funds. And the design process and funding falls on the local municipality. And smaller communities like us have limited options. And for us, it is the Mass Central Rail Trail project, a regional project connecting us beyond our own municipal borders. Going to town meeting is not and is always the last resort. It's a gamble. And at least in my community, bringing forward a $1 million appropriation is a request that's basically dead on arrival, which means the project just sits languishing. We are disappointed in our low score, and it seems as though that our project may lack merits based on the scoring system. This is a regional project, and what's good for Hudson is good for Waltham, which is good for Sudbury, which is good for Berlin. We may not have robust public transportation. We may not be part of Chapter 161A as an MBTA community, but some of the positive externalities of this project and maybe others that are in the lower scoring categories are not captured in the scoring methodology. And I just want to, remind everyone, and I think everybody on this board knows, that regional rail trails provide additional recreation access to the region. It provides air quality benefits, providing alternative commuting options. And for us in particular in Hudson, as we have a legacy of rail trail design and development, it provides an economic development catalyst. And if you've been to downtown Hudson, if it weren't for the Assabet Rail Trail and the legacy of my predecessor, who spoke just a little while ago, Representative Socolo, that was the catalyst for our economic renaissance. Best Main Street in America, 2021. I'm looking forward to working with this MPO board to continue to advance the design effort, and I'm hoping that there can be more funding in the future allocated to help communities like ourselves advance a regional rail trail project, because we did hear when we received our Mass Trails grant from DCR, the Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll, basically say this is a goal of the Commonwealth is to create a statewide regional rail trail network. And the town of Hudson really wants to be part of that process, and we can't do it without you. Thank you very much for your comments and your consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Eric Johnson.
Hi, thank you. Eric Johnson, City Engineer, City of Framingham, Massachusetts. I just want to say a few words on the project of the intersection improvements of 126, 135, and the MBTA CSX Railroad. This design is currently proposed under your alternatives for FY26. This project is on the LRTP and listed in the Draft Destination 2050 University of Roadway Projects, as well as the LRTP relevant Mass DOT PRC approved roadway projects. It's a critical project for Framingham and certainly the region, will dramatically increase capacity at routes 125 and 126. These are full access principal arterials that serve the region and greatly impacted by the immediate adjacent railroad tracks that serve the Worcester commuter rail system, as well as significant freight traffic. The rail crossing is an integral component of this intersection, they force between 60 and 70 preemptions via gate closures on every weekday. These closures average between 2.5 and 3 hours total closure time each day. When added to the roadway signals, the total roadway closure for 126 is 14 to 15 hours a day, and for 135 is slightly less than that. The vehicle traffic counts are 25,000 vehicles per day. Unlike other rail crossings, this closure time is exacerbated by the fact that the commuter rail stop is one of the busiest on the MBTA system and only 500 feet from the intersection. And these preemptions are particularly lengthy as trains are slowing down or speeding up as they go through the intersection. There's also the nearby CSX yard. It's only 50 feet from the intersection, and we see regular preemptions 10 to 20 minutes in the middle of the day. That's 10 to 20 minutes of gate closure throughout this busy intersection. MBTA has also made it clear that they intend to increase the rail traffic and usage of this line. Now, as far as the specific use of these funds that we're requesting, the last conceptual design dates back to 2009. Since then, conditions have changed largely due to local development. Over 2,000 housing units and 1,200 between 2,000 housing units have been approved and 1,200 constructed since 2017 alone. This affects the previous layout of the proposed infrastructure and the current design. It also affects temporary construction routes during this very intrusive construction for this project. There's also been a significant amount of turnover of population and new residents coming in for this new development. This project also includes robust outreach and education for these new residents. Keep in mind that this immediate neighborhood is a disadvantaged neighborhood. It's an environmental justice for all three check marks for minority, income, and English isolation. I believe that part of this design really needs to go to a robust public outreach and again to reevaluate the current design. Thank you very much for this time, and I'll be around if there's any questions.
Thank you. Next up is Marcia Rasmussen.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Marcia Rasmussen. I'm here on behalf of the town of Sudbury and its Rail Trails Advisory Committee. Sudbury's Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 3 is one of only 3 projects initially proposed for inclusion in the FFY 2029 TIP and is part of the regional transportation network intersecting with the Mass Central Rail Trail in Sudbury and providing access to the Fitchburg commuter line in West Concord. This project will complete 20 of the 25 miles envisioned by Bruce Freeman, and I'm voicing strong support for scenario 4B as a compromise situation for the 3 new projects that are anxiously awaiting listing in the TIP. So I thank the MPO staff and board members for their consideration of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Tom DePercio.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Tom DePercio, city engineer in the city of Marlborough. And I'm here representing Mayor Dumas and our city council to advocate for design pilot funding for the design of our complete streets project, reconstruction and improvements of Granger Boulevard. I want to thank the MPO and the planning staff for its review of our application and the scoring. Granger Boulevard is the section of Route 20 that goes through downtown Marlboro. It's 2/3 of a mile and includes 5 signalized intersections. It's in the heart of our downtown, the middle of our environmental justice, low income, and English isolation zones. And it's central to our public parking, our public transit, and the extension to the rail trail that we recently constructed down to the downtown area. Our city council and our Economic Development Corporation has worked hard for years to rezone its core downtown areas as part of a revitalization effort that is really starting to pay off now, where we've got 3 significant mixed use and multifamily housing projects that are under construction now in the downtown area, and 3 more that are in the final stages of permitting. So as these come to fruition, there'll be many more pedestrians and vehicles in the downtown areas. So this project is really key to support that. Granger Boulevard now, it's got some extra lane width and large intersections and no bike accommodations. So it's really not conducive to the efforts at revitalization that we've been working on. So finally, I just want to note that the city's got the matching funds ready. We're ready to go and support the project. We've got a project manager that's been assigned at DOT, and we're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Cynthia Dittbrenner.
Hi, thank you all. I'm Cynthia Dittbrenner. I'm the Vice President of Conservation and Resilience at the Trustees, speaking for the Argilla Road project in Ipswich that was also on the FY29 list for potential funding. And I wanted to also advocate for scenario 4B, which Ethan will present, that provides partial funding to that project and several others. The road's underwater right now, no surprise. Been underwater since 7 o'clock this morning. We were saying for a while it was flooding once a month, but this last year and 2 years been flooding more and more. Usually it's floods at the high tide for about 5 to 6 days consecutively once a month in the winter months. And looking forward at the heights of the tides this summer will be the first time we actually see the road closing during the summer months when these areas are most frequently trafficked. So that is actually in alignment with projections that by 2030, we'll see it flooding every day on the high tide. So very urgent project. The reason I'm advocating for 4B, even though I know it won't get fully funding until FY23. So what's the big deal? It provides us a lot of assurance and the ability to plan, just knowing that it has actually made it onto the list. We can move forward with the permitting pathway, which we've worked very long and hard with DEP to actually figure out. So I would like to get that permit in. It allows us to do some fundraising efforts. And I know if it gets on the list, it's fully funded, but we come from a nonprofit. I'm with the trustees, so we just have fundraising in our blood. If it's on the tip, I can go for a federal earmark, which both Senators Warren and Markey have already said they supported, and in fact submitted last year, and Congressman Moulton also would support if it was on the tip. So possibly we could even construct an FY29 with partial funding if we fundraised. I wanted to give you a few other quick updates based on your conversation that you had a few weeks ago. I know I talked 2 weeks ago. One is we didn't receive points for having a bike lane or improved pedestrian access because due to the permitting implications of being in the salt marsh, we're not able to widen the road. But since then, we've talked with David Lautzenheiser, who's a senior transportation planner at MAPC, about some alternative striping techniques. And we're seriously considering striping a single lane down the center, providing much wider buffers on either side that would allow cars to pass if they came upon each other, but I think would be perfectly acceptable given that transportation is often in one direction at different times of the day at that site, providing a lot of space. So I don't know if you can give us more points for that or not, but I just wanted to let you know. I also know there was a few comments that came up about the cost. You have us right now listed at 6.6 million. Stantec did our cost estimate for us a few years ago. It came in at 4.02 million, and that included a 20% contingency. So if I apply a 3% inflation rate out to 2030, that's a construction estimate of 5.24. So since you have us at 6.6, I calculated that's about a $1.34 million buffer. Maybe that's a lot, maybe that's not a lot. It seems like a lot to me, but I just wanted to give you those numbers in context. So thank you so much. Again, I advocate for the 4B scenario that Ethan is going to be proposing. I appreciate your time and sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Thank you. Next up, Melissa Tentaklis.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Mueller and my fellow MPO board members. I'm speaking here during this public comment period, really on behalf of the Burlington Wynn Street project. It was an intersection project up for consideration under the design pilot scenario. And I want to just kind of maybe take a quick step back. I understand and appreciate all of the staff's work and the analysis gone into the points. And I understand, you know, Sherburne and Holliston under that intersection category makes a lot of sense. And I think my public comment to my board members and kind of just to keep our mind elevated enough that, you know, the suburbs still, they are in kind of this slow dynamic move. I came from California, started working in Somerville, and then have been working in Lexington and came out to Burlington, which is an edge city, very different in its built in form and its transit. But the reason I came out here is because the community itself is looking to change. There's no doubt that there's continued development pressure in communities that are on kind of the outskirts, still part of the Boston metro region, that really need attention and that cannot do it on their own. I think in many ways, Burlington is in a position to, you know, contribute more funding than maybe some of our other MPO communities. You know, Hudson was, you know, speaking to the challenges, and we do have a strong commercial core. But I think what, you know, we have been trying to balance is really that reshaping of growth into the future. So what I see with the MPO has an opportunity here in communities like Burlington and suburban communities that are really changing their land use to allow for more housing and meeting market demands for people who want to live in walkable communities. So this intersection project really represents that. And part of, you know, my work here, supporting the administration and supporting, you know, an increase in desire for, you know, areas that are really transit oriented. We might not have significant MBTA routes out here, but once we have areas that people are able to live, walk, and mix those uses, we need those safe roadway projects that we cannot do on our own. So I just want to keep that kind of alive in you know, people's minds as you move forward in consideration of, you know, not just this project, but all our projects. And, you know, even with this one, I understood that, you know, our price tag was a little higher. If partial funds, you know, maybe become available, maybe that is something we could consider. And we would go to town meeting and make that ask. So I just want to put that out there. And this is also supplementing what Mike Espejo, our select board chair, had said as well. So thank you.
Thank you. There is someone online with the identification YLIP with their hand up. Could you please state your name for the record before making your comment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Lip. I'm with the City of Malden. I'm the city engineer for Malden. I'm here on behalf of Mayor Christensen. We want to advocate for the complete street design funding for Route 60 in Malden. It scored pretty high in the project. It's a 3-mile stretch of Route 60. Route 60 connect Route 91, Route 1 and Interstate 93. It has 7 bus routes on this stretch of Route 60. It's an important corridor for Malden. And if not if not able to say get on 100% design, the city is willing to request for a partial funding for say 50% for the 25% design for the FY25. And that's, I just want to keep it short. That's the city is, would like to see that be put back on the FY25 tip design funding for Route 60 in Malden. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the people who have signed up or raised their hand online. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time? Brad?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Brad Rawson. I serve the City of Somerville as Director of Mobility. Quick comments, Chair. I just want to thank project proponents, board members, and agency staff for being here in person and online. And like my comments 2 weeks ago, Chair, I want to take this opportunity to say to project proponents, stick with this MPO for the long haul. Don't just plug in during this 30 or 60 or 90-day decision point process for the annual TIP. Next year's TIP is going to be on us before we know it. The era of constrained resources will haunt us again next cycle. If we do not continue the coalition building, the risk control, and the process improvements that have characterized this current TIP cycle, and credit to staff for helping us work through those processes, we will be in another tricky environment next year. The Executive Director's report included a report about the Intercore Transportation Subgroup meeting just earlier this week. We had great participation. I want to shout out the City of Lynn and the City of Cambridge who provided specific project updates. And I want to encourage all sub-regional representatives and project proponents to find the time and do the work next month and this summer and this fall. And don't take for granted that your projects are just going to roll over and we're going to be doing this again 1 year from now. MPO is like a garden. It needs to be watered every month, not just in the spring tip cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments at this time? Seeing none, if you want to make a comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will try to call on you. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Derek?
Thank you and good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Cravat. I'm the committee chair of the MPO's Unified Planning Work Program Committee from MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. Just wanted to remind everyone the UPWP committee will be meeting a week from today, next Thursday, April 11th, to discuss the proposed universe of projects for the 2025 fiscal year UPWP. So I know there was a ranking survey that went around, so thank you everyone for filling that out. We have the results from that will be presented next week. I will also be discussing amendment number 2 to the current fiscal year 24 UPWP. So meeting materials will be posted online and it's open to anyone, including members of the public. So looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Any other committee chairs reports? Tom Bent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The MOU Update Committee met yesterday, Wednesday, April 3rd. We received a progress update from staff on the discussions with the Advisory Council on their mission and role. Staff then went over the committee's recommendation on the RTA representation memorandum, which will be presented to the full board on April 18 to vote upon. We also received a progress update on the discussions between CTPS and MAPC on the fiduciary agreement. Our next meeting will be on May 1st at 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, Tom. Jen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee met last Thursday, March 28th. We, as a board, had asked the committee to recommend a path forward to address the funding deficit in fiscal 27 after hearing from all the proponents with projects in that year. I'd like to thank all the committee members and all of the project proponents and their teams who attended. We had a very productive discussion. Ethan will provide a more detailed summary of what we're recommending. At a very high level, though, we've reached an agreement with the City of Woburn to delay their Woburn Common project out to fiscal 29. That at least is our committee's recommendation, and is kind of the baseline of the 2 scenarios that Ethan's going to present today. Some committee members also raised the possibility of using advanced construction on that project if it would enable us to fit in some new projects out in 29. So that also is informing the scenarios today. And then additionally, officials from the town of Weston shared that they have a key town meeting vote to approve additional design funds for the Route 30 project. We're wishing them success, so please send them thoughts their way on May 4th. And then finally, while we ultimately recommended delaying rather than removing a project from the TIP this cycle, we discussed spending some time after we voted out this next TIP to really think through what our approach ought to be if this pattern of project delays and their associated ripple effects continues, and what role we as a board can play in keeping projects we've programmed moving forward in their design. So I'll leave the rest to Ethan, and happy to take questions when we reach that point in the agenda.
Thank you, Jen. Any other committee chairs' reports? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we have not had a meeting since our last meeting, so I have nothing to report there. Our next meeting will be on the 10th, next Wednesday. You can check out the agenda online, and everyone's always welcome to join us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item is the minutes of February 15th. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the minutes? And please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I'll make a motion to approve the February 15th meeting minutes.
Is there a second? Seconded by Dennis Giambetti. Any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, abstain.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd.
Ned Codd, yes.
John Alessi.
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Do we have Kristen Guichard? Thank you. Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tentakoulis. Chris DiOrio.
Chris DiOrio, yes.
Rachel Benson.
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Next item on the agenda is the federal fiscal year 24 to 28 Transportation Improvement Program, TIP Amendment number 5. Ethan Lapointe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe. I am the Transportation Improvement Program Manager with the Boston Region MPO. Before anybody gets too excited, my first presentation here today is about the current TIP for federal fiscal years 2024 to 28 for Amendment 5 there. This does not pertain to any new projects seeking funding for the federal fiscal years 25 to 29 TIP, so stay tuned. So for this TIP amendment presentation, this will be a presentation, discussion, and vote to endorse TIP Amendment 5 as it has already completed its 21-day public comment period. For a refresher on the contents of Amendment 5 to the federal fiscal years 2024 to 28 TIP, this proposed 2 changes to the statewide highway program in federal fiscal years 2024 and 25 to reflect project details and readiness updates made at the February 15th TIP readiness days. These changes include a delay of a bridge replacement of Route 62 over the Ipswich River in Middleton out of federal fiscal year 24 into 25, and a delay of a bridge preservation contract in East Boston for 5 bridges carrying State Route 1A and their associated ramps, also into federal fiscal year 2025 from 2024. This amendment is also incorporating, while this would normally constitute an administrative adjustment, additional detail for some projects for the MBTA's projects and programs there. The tip currently illustrates the different investment programs that the MBTA has contained in it, and this project list helps to add additional specificity as to which projects are being funded by those programs. As a tip amendment, there was a 21-day public comment period associated with Amendment 5. This comment period began on March 11th and concluded on April 1st. Staff received one comment during this period, which was expressing opposition to the conversion of rail corridors for bicycle use in favor of transit expansion, namely rail trails. Staff did respond to the commenter to note feedback here. However, the comment did specifically mention Amendment 5 in it, though none of the projects that are included within Amendment 5 pertain to any rail trails. So given this public comment and the completion of the comment period, staff are requesting that the board votes to endorse Amendment 5. And the next couple of slides are just back up with those project details.
Thank you, Ethan. Any questions for Ethan? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve the amendment as presented today? And please state your name for the record when making the motion.
Eric Barassa, I'll make a motion to approve Amendment 5.
Is there a second? Dennis Giambetti has seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Gerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd,
Ned Codd, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tentakoulis, Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now what the people have been waiting for, Ethan. Tip project programming scenario, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. For my next presentation today, as noted, this next presentation is an action item for the final project programming scenario for the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP. This is the final project programming scenario for the funding that is in the TIP for regional prioritization, often called regional target funding. As Tegan mentioned earlier at this meeting, discussions regarding the projects for the statewide highway, the MBTA, and the Regional Transit Authority programs will be discussed at a later meeting. Oh, the clicker's doing that thing again. To provide an overview for today's presentation, there are a lot of different topics to cover here. Thanks to the hard work of the TIP Process Readiness and Engagement Committee meeting last week, we can mostly focus on a summary for some of these items. This presentation will begin with an update on some of the public engagement activities that staff have been undertaking with regard to the TIP in recent weeks, and then we'll continue from there to discuss how, during the public comment period for the federal fiscal years 25-29 TIP, staff will be doing public engagement to solicit comments there. I'll then provide a brief update and overview for some of the many resources before you today, including some resources that are on the MPO calendar just for that little extra bit of detail. And as I just mentioned, I'll go into a recap of what happened at last week's TIP Process Readiness and Engagement Committee, or TIPPER, meeting. At that meeting, as Jen mentioned in their chair's report, there was a discussion and recommendation that that committee has made with regard to how to resolve the deficit in federal fiscal year 2027. Staff also have an update to provide on the scaling of the project design pilot, financially speaking, as to the number of projects that could be accommodated within that program. And we'll then go into providing some additional detail and an opportunity to discuss the federal fiscal year's 2026 long-range transportation plan project design funding based on requests that were made by the city of Framingham and town of Lexington for some initial design funding there. We'll then have a discussion around transit projects, namely the new projects for regional transit authorities, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority and Cape Ann Transportation Authority, additional funding contributions to existing projects that the MPO is funding for the MBTA, and utilizing some of the currently unprogrammed funding in federal fiscal year 2025 for either new MBTA projects or to provide some coverage for currently funded statewide highway projects by MassDOT. And then if there are any other items that may need to be incorporated into the scenario, those may also be addressed. But the main activity and action that staff requesting the board takes today is that 8th item, a vote to adopt a final scenario so that after today's meeting, a draft tip can be presented and released at the April 18th MPO meeting. To move into that very brief public engagement update at the start of that presentation overview, staff have recently been conducting some one-on-one discussions with various advocacy organizations and other public commenters as we look to advance the tip for a release for a draft. The most recent activity that staff undertook was a meeting with some students at Newton's Bigelow Middle School to discuss some microtransit funding in that community. And we're hoping that once the public comment period for the tip begins on April 22nd, and potentially will last for a 30-day public comment period, which is above the minimum required 21 days, that we can pursue additional activities in that same vein. Staff are looking for different opportunities in your communities to share information on both the tip and all of the other different activities that the MPO conducts, including the Unified Planning Work Program and long-range transportation plans at different community events, not only during the spring during this public comment period, but also into the summer. If your community is planning a community event and is looking for any folks to table those events for nonprofits, please do not hesitate to reach out to us as we may be interested in attending and sharing some information there. That just moved on. Did I just lose? Okay. So to move into a discussion on some of the resources that staff have prepared for members to consider today, there are two sets of scenarios. The primary one for consideration here is scenario 4A and 4B, which should be before members right now. There is also a bundle of scenarios under scenario 3. Scenario 3 and those scenarios in there will not be discussed today, but they are there for reference should members or members of the public be interested in investigating some of the information that was discussed at last week's TIP committee meeting. The recommendation, as I will get into, that was made at that meeting has been promoted to scenario 4A, and an alternative is also available, or an alternative interpretation of the utilization of advanced construction funding is available as scenario 4B. So really, it's just 4A and 4B today, with 3 there as backup. For additional resources for today, we've also once again made available a project descriptions page for all newly considered projects for the TIP for members to consider. There's also a similar document posted online right now in a draft format on the MPO meeting calendar, which incorporates letters of support for each of these projects that are listed here and appends some additional letters of support at the very end for projects that may not have initially been considered for funding, for the fill-ins, namely. There's also, in tandem with those project descriptions, a TIP project scoring summary should members wish to reference the different project scoring details, cost estimates for design, and cost estimates for construction as scenarios are considered. And in tandem, evaluation metrics for new projects, not only showing how projects are scored at a high level using the MPO scoring criteria, but also additional metrics to consider, including cost per mile, kilograms of CO2 reduced, the last year that a municipality may have had a TIP project, et cetera. And the MBTA has also provided a project readiness update that I believe there's a physical copy of available now here, once we get to that discussion on the utilization of funding in federal fiscal year 2025. So with that, for a recap of the March 28th TIP committee meeting, at that March 28th TIP Process Readiness and Engagement Committee meeting, staff began with an update on Newton's Newton in Motion, or NUMO, microtransit service. As some members of this board may remember, back in December, there was an amendment, Amendment 3, to the federal fiscal years 2024 to 28 TIP that was meant to reflect a scope change or a request from the City of Newton for a scope change for their microtransit services. Given some ongoing fiscal constraint considerations on Newton's microtransit service in terms of appropriating funding at the local level to support it, the city is pursuing a new vendor for the service, and this new vendor may not be able to provide electric vehicles or shared rides in the newly proposed version of NUMO. What this means is that without electric vehicles or those shared rides, it is very unlikely that there will be the ability to demonstrate an air quality benefit for this shuttle in federal fiscal year 2025. And as a result, these scenarios are already factoring out the omission of about $209,000 of funding for NUMO in federal fiscal year 25, given that change in scope and the lack of eligibility for funding under the congestion mitigation air quality funding these shuttles use. The committee also heard progress reports and readiness updates, as the chair, as Jen mentioned, with regard to the projects that were under consideration in federal fiscal year 2027 for delay or removal, and that committee had identified a preferred scenario from those ones presented, being scenario 3E, which recommended a shift of the Woburn Common project from its current federal fiscal year of 2026 out into 2029. The initial recommendation made by MassDOT at the TIP readiness days was a delay to fiscal 27, but there was insufficient financial resources in fiscal 27 to accommodate a delay just to that year. Hence why it is recommended in both scenarios to be pushed back. Again, scenario 3E has now been promoted to scenario 4A, but there is a permutation of that scenario in the form of 4B that does functionally the same thing to the Woburn Common project, but balances the funding differently to accommodate new projects in fiscal 29. To go into more details on exactly what scenario 3E is, and also by proxy, scenario 4A, this scenario delays a $17.38 million project out of federal fiscal year 2027 into federal fiscal year 2029. The project is still not yet at 25% design, despite being on the TIP since federal fiscal years 2021 and 25 in that cycle. And there also is the risk where the cost has not yet been revised since that TIP cycle in a substantial manner. Therefore, once 25% design is achieved, that cost may, not necessarily, but it may increase. With a delay to federal fiscal year 2029, there is also the need to factor in the inflation factor that the MPO and MassDOT provide to projects as they move out. So the project cost is also being adjusted upwards from $17.38 million to $18.67 million in total federal participating cost estimates in 2029. Scenario 3E reflects the full funding of that $18.67 million in federal fiscal year 2029, attaining fiscal constraint in 2027 with about $900,000 remaining in that year, but because of the cost impact in federal fiscal year 2029, not leaving sufficient money available in that year to fund any new projects there, at least in a sizable manner with sufficient reserves. With regard to scenario 4 in the discussion here today, as I mentioned, there is a permutation of scenario 3E that does fund some new projects. Some members of this board and also members of the TIP committee had expressed an interest at the March 28th meeting last week in having staff investigate the use of advanced construction on the Woburn Common project to allocate funding across multiple years. Advanced construction is the mechanism by which projects that have a multi-year construction schedule can have their funding programmed in the TIP to reflect that multi-year construction schedule. By utilizing that method of funding, by having projects be funded across multiple years, this would enable all three new projects to be partially funded in federal fiscal year 2029, but would increase future funding obligations to be made by the MPO in the federal fiscal years 2026 to 30 TIP this time next year. Scenario 4A, again, reflects what I showed on the last slide under scenario 3E, funding no new projects in federal fiscal year 2029. There's still one new project in federal fiscal year 26, but funding the Woburn Common project in full in that year, whereas scenario 4B reflects a compromise, still funding Woburn in federal fiscal year 2029, but also using some of the additional funding there to fund those three other projects. Geez, that jumped quickly. So to go into scenario 4B and provide that additional detail there. Scenario 4B still funds the Woburn Common project in federal fiscal year 29, but does so with 50% of its funding. Given some of the indications that were made at TIP readiness days with regard to the ability to construct the project, there is an indication, also based on discussions with the city, as was presented at previous committee meetings, that the project may require more than one construction season. As a result, the project could be funded with 50% of its funding in federal fiscal year 2029 and 50% of its funding in federal fiscal year 2030, $9.35 million in each of those years. In similar fashion, giving Bellingham's Route 126 reconstruction project and that project's additional incorporation of some elements that are more focused on riverine flooding, culvert widening, and other bike and shared use path elements versus a previous design presented to this board for consideration last year, that project would have $8.34 million in federal fiscal year 29, with the remaining $8.34 million to be funded in federal fiscal year 2030. Given the environmental sensitivity of the Ipswich-Argilla Road project in that community, there's also the expectation there that depending on the advertisement date for that project as well, it may require multiple construction seasons. It is initially being requested for funding consideration at $3 million in federal fiscal year 2029, and if by this time next year it requires additional funding contributions by the MPO, there would be about $2.3 million in federal fiscal year 2030 to program for that project. And I'll have a table on the next slide that shows and lines up all of those future contributions. Last but not least, there is an important consideration for Sudbury's Bruce Freeman Phase 3 project. This would be programmed for $4.26 million in federal fiscal year 29, with the remainder of the funding in federal fiscal year 2030. One particularly important thing to note for this project is that it is the understanding of staff right now that should the MPO fund the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 3, that provides sufficient funding in the MassDOT Highway Program to support that subsequent segment in Framingham in federal fiscal year 2029, which is currently expected to be in the statewide highway program, as statewide highway had initially indicated that Bruce Freeman Phase 3 was one of their preferences for trails expansion in their fiscal 29 program. Scenario 4B, like Scenario 4A, still attains fiscal constraint across each year of the TIP. The outcome to federal fiscal year 2027 is the same at about $937,000 remaining in funding in 27. It leaves about $787,000 in federal fiscal year 2029, which is less than Scenario 4A, but it does so to fund those 3 new projects in federal fiscal year 29, 2 of which, Bellingham and Ipswich, had applied to the 2024 to 28 TIP cycle last year. As mentioned previously, this slide shows and lines up how some of those future funding obligations in federal fiscal year 2030 may potentially be accounted for in the 26-30 TIP cycle. That said, there may be some additional cost changes or readiness changes that may adjust these numbers a year from now. In most cases, new projects are being recommended for funding at 50% in federal fiscal year 2029, with the remainder of funding to be utilized in federal fiscal year 2030. Between those 3 new projects and the other half of Woburn's Town Common project, that leaves about $24.5 million to be funded between the 4 of them in federal fiscal year 2030. There is also, given the MPO's expected contributions to the Rutherford Avenue reconstruction project in Boston, McGrath Highway conversion to a boulevard in Somerville, and Lynn's Western Avenue project on Route 107, the expectation of about an additional $61 million for other advanced construction projects in federal fiscal year 2030. That amounts to about $85,204,766 of initial outlays in federal fiscal year 2030 for that TIP development cycle. That is compared to, in this TIP development cycle, about $120,248,000, with the reduction between those 2 years being driven by some more heavy contributions to Somerville's McGrath Highway project. It only has an expected contribution of $5 million by the MPO, given the current cost estimate in federal fiscal year 2030. It's also important to note right now that given how the contracting is likely to work for the project design pilot in federal fiscal year 2025, that it is unlikely that projects pursuing funding through the project design pilot would be ready to apply for construction in federal fiscal year 2030. The reason being is that, as I will get to, I believe on this slide for the project design pilot, any of the projects seeking design funding for federal fiscal year 2025 through this current TIP cycle would likely be ready to begin contracting at the earliest of October 1st, 2024, basically at the beginning of the development season for the next TIP cycle. Therefore, it is unlikely that they would have a designer under contract once application periods begin for the 26 to 30 TIP. Hence why we may not see any applications from any of these entities, though it may still happen, for the federal fiscal year 2030 funding. To go into more detail on the design pilot and the scaling there to give an idea of what projects may be moving forward to potentially seek that construction funding in the future, MassDOT recently informed MPO staff that the initial $10 million that was set aside in scenario 3 and was discussed initially at the March 21st MPO meeting and was supposed to be discussed at last week's TIP process readiness and engagement committee meeting would exceed the capacity of MassDOT to manage the project design pilot in federal fiscal year 2025. There are 14 projects that were still in the running for this project design pilot, amounting to about 17.3, I want to say $8 million. And naturally, even with $10 million set aside there, many projects would still not be ready to be funded. One of the key considerations in terms of balancing the project design pilot in federal fiscal year 2025 that staff are requesting that this board consider is that as a pilot round of design funding, this pilot should both be deliverable and match the ambitions that this board would wish to set for supporting project design, but must also critically be manageable. One of the precedents that has been set with regard to funding novel processes for delivering projects is the microtransit pilot program through the MPO's Community Connections program. And one of the main considerations of that microtransit pilot program as it enters a later year of its life cycle is that should there be many projects and pilots adopted in a novel program like that, it presents a difficulty in managing and monitoring the success of those projects. In particular, given that project design takes quite a long time to move through the process, that also means that given long design timelines, there may be a potential for further complications and difficulty in management and monitoring if there is potentially turnover at both the project proponents, the MPO, or MassDOT project managers as these projects try to advance towards construction funding. Therefore, it is critical that as a design pilot to be a proof of concept for future rounds of design funding to be delivered, that it can be managed, monitored, evaluated, and improved upon effectively by staff. Given the recommendation by MassDOT that $10 million would exceed their ability to, or would rather exceed the capacity to manage that many design contracts, staff have recommended a list of the top performing projects in the Complete Streets and Bicycle and Pedestrian Network Expansion programs for the top 2 of each there that amount to a total of 6 projects in 8 communities at around $6.15 million. This first project on the list is the highest scoring project in the Complete Streets Investment Program, which is Arlington's Broadway Complete Streets 100% design application. This project was initially evaluated by staff for 25% design, but the request for funding and a later design stage was updated throughout the application process. The town of Arlington last had a project in the regional prioritization pool of the TIP in 2014. And this project currently incorporates improvements to bus routes, including the MBTA's Route 87, directly along the corridor. This project is also entirely included within an adopted 3A district within the town of Arlington and existing multifamily housing and public facilities. In similar fashion, for the city of Framingham, there is $850,000 for the highest scoring bicycle and pedestrian design project for the second phase of the Chris Walsh Trail, with Framingham's latest TIP project being in federal fiscal year 2023. As was mentioned previously, this project has a direct connection to the MBTA commuter rail and MWRTA intermodal facility at that commuter rail station and is proximal to both planned possible Section 3A zoning and existing dense concentrations of mixed-use developments, including a large concentration of affordable housing. Holliston and Sherburne, with Holliston being the next project, are both applying for a joint application for improvements to traffic safety on Route 16. Holliston's project is requesting $250,000 for intersection improvements to signalize Route 16 and Whitney Street near the Upper Charles River Rail Trail. In initial discussions around the project design pilot, MPO members had advocated for the possibility of funding projects in communities that have not had a TIP project in quite some time. The last TIP project that Holliston had in the regional prioritization program was before 2008, as the records that are currently available to MPO staff here only go back to 2008, at least in Appendix D of the TIP. There is no transit service in this area as the Route 6 for the MWRTA does not directly utilize this roadway, though it is near to it, and this is a commercial site, but it is proximal to the Upper Charles River Rail Trail. It incorporates a significant amount of sidewalk extension into downtown Holliston. The next second highest scoring complete streets project in Marlborough is the reconstruction of Granger Boulevard, which is State Route 20, with a score of 79.9, requesting $1.22 million. The last project in the city of Marlborough was in 2017, and this project has direct service by 3 intersecting MWRTA bus routes, being the Route 7, 7C, and Route 15. There's also planned and existing and underway mixed-use development projects, and this project is very close to, in fact, it directly abuts Marlborough's Housing Authority. The next second highest scoring bicycle and pedestrian network design pilot project is a $1.55 million request with a joint collaborative effort between the towns of Norfolk, Wrentham, and Walpole for the design of the Metacomet Greenway. Norfolk's last TIP project was in federal fiscal year 2009. Wrentham was in 2024 with their the Route 1A and Interstate 495 ramps improvement project, and Walpole's was in federal fiscal year 2020. This area does not have any direct transit service, though it does receive some microtransit and on-demand work through the Greater Attleboro and Taunton Regional Transit Authority, or GATRA-GO, microtransit services. Tentatively, these municipalities are still evaluating potential land use changes along the corridor, and there is a possibility that certain housing developments for Section 3A MBTA's community compliance may be sited along this potential proposed alignment for the Metacomet Greenway in Norfolk and Wrentham, though to be determined there. And then last but not least is the other project on Route 16, the 6th and final project proposed here by staff, which is the highest scoring project overall in this pool, which is the reconstruction of Route 27 and Route 16 in the intersection improvements program, requesting $900,000 there to take the project to 100% design. As with Holliston, Sherburne has also not had a regionally prioritized project on the TIP since before 2008. There's no direct transit access here, but there are proposals for transit improvements should service ever be incorporated, including designated pullouts early on for bus access. There's also planned potentially Section 3A housing development and existing Chapter 40B affordable housing developments underway in the project area. So again, these are 6 projects that are the highest scoring projects in complete streets and bicycle and pedestrian networks, with a joint application between Holliston and Sherburne in the intersection improvements program amounting to $6.15 million in federal fiscal year 2025 for 8 municipalities. So as I just went into detail with on that slide, the point of this selection and that limited amount of 6 projects there is to balance the following priorities that MPO members have made and expressed to staff. 1, indicating and trying to prioritize projects that perform well in the MPO's project scoring across each of the different investment programs. 2nd, improving access to both existing housing and planned housing, and access to and investment in transit connections as well. In the sense of the Norfolk, Wrentham, and Walpole Metacomet project, and also in the Route 16 projects in Sherburne and Holliston, there's also an indication and demonstration of direct regional cooperation and joint collaboration between municipalities, and also numerous municipalities that have had experience in delivering projects, and also some that have not been on the TIP in recent years, some in over 20 years. While, again, with only 6 projects of those 14 remaining, most applications will not be funded, staff believe that a successful design pilot today, in federal fiscal year 25, will enable the creation of a more sustainable and long-term pipeline for design development for municipalities. There are currently no formal plans that staff are considering for a federal fiscal year 2026 round of this pilot, as selected projects won't be able to commence any contracting for design services until October 1st, 2024. What that means is that as the federal fiscal year 26 to 30 TIP is being developed, and as staff would be looking to solicit projects for a federal fiscal year 26 cycle, there wouldn't be the opportunity, there would not be the opportunity to be able to monitor the progress of the first round of pilots before that second wave comes in. And it's important that those kinds of monitoring and process improvements take place first. So while I mentioned that there is no formal federal fiscal year 2026 design pilot round, there is consideration that staff are requesting for the board to consider for 2 projects to be partially funded for initial design stages in federal fiscal year 2026 through a separate program. So to provide some background on this initial request from these communities, the federal fiscal year 2025 design pilot was sort of a focal point for engagement for the TIP in fall of 2023 as we work to try to solicit projects for the design pilot, hence the large amount of applications here. Some of the municipalities that were interested in this design pilot had expressed an interest in using design to advance large-scale major capital projects. Some of these proponents were expressing an interest in using it to fund existing design work, which was not eligible under the pilot, but others were utilizing it to recommend advancing designs on projects that are in the MPO's long-range transportation plan and do not currently have a design source identified. These two projects, though they were not initially recommended by staff to apply in the fall, would amount to about $3.05 million of funding in federal fiscal year 2026. The reason why that request emerged was given the outcome of the TIP readiness days, there was sufficient funding surpluses in federal fiscal year 26 to accommodate additional levels of design funding in that year, and by virtue of how some of the stakeholders overlapped between the federal fiscal year's 25 design pilot and some of the stakeholders involved in the long-range transportation program project design, requests were made initially by the town of Lexington and were then extended by staff to the city of Framingham to potentially enable some design work there. This would be about $1.65 million for Lexington to work with MassDOT District 4 on bringing the first phase of the Route 4 and 225 project to 25% design. That first phase of the project being the interchange, where improvements at that interchange would enable future complete streets work to take place on Hartwell Avenue and Wood Street. This project, if to be delivered, would likely have to be delivered across multiple different construction phases and potentially different separate projects. For Framingham, the request for $1.4 million was meant to reflect a request that the City of Framingham made jointly with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for the Federal Reconnecting Communities Grant Program for the latest round, for which they were not awarded, to design initial improvements and update the concept from 2009 for the Route 126 and 135 interchange. Given, as the city mentioned earlier in this meeting, some of the updates that have been made to the City of Framingham since, there's also a need to conduct some public engagement work to identify how the new proposed design should benefit the community. Again, this is a an item that staff are providing detail for consideration by this body, as contracting would fall within the federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP. By programming the projects today, this enables the project proponents to engage local, state, and regional stakeholders over the next year and a half by being in the TIP. Staff would then ask the project proponents to reapply in the federal fiscal year 2026 to 30 TIP so that these projects, which are being presented today as a possible fill-in, could be fully scored and then further evaluated by MPO board members with those new insights that may emerge over the next few months. As a disclaimer up front, the requests that are being made today by these project proponents would not bring these projects to 100% design, and rather they are preliminary efforts in this regard. Lexington's request, again, is for sufficient funding to bring it to 25% design in partnership with MassDOT, given MassDOT's ownership of the Route 4 225 at 95 interchange for one component as what is likely to be a multi-phase, multi-year effort. And the interchange itself is the linchpin of that effort. This is also, given that this is not 100% design, not necessarily a commitment by the MPO to fund all future design work for these projects. However, by utilizing federal funding for design today, it does not preclude the possibility of those project proponents seeking federal funding in the future, which could come from other sources or could, at the discretion of this board, be additional regional target funding. Staff have also made sure to emphasize this fact to the project proponents, alongside mention that funding these projects for construction will likely require pursuit of federal discretionary grants as well, given the current cost estimates. Again, these projects would fall within federal fiscal year 2026, so unlike the federal fiscal year 2025 design pilot projects, these would not begin contracting this October, and rather would be another item that would likely come up for discussion again in the development of next year's TIP, once further information is had. Or becomes available, I should say. I don't know if somebody can move me to the next slide. Thank you. I think the clicker got knocked off. If we can go on to the next slide to move into the federal fiscal year 2025 surpluses and funding available in that year. Given some of the changes that were made in federal fiscal years 2025 and 26 as recommended at the TIP readiness days, there was additional funding surpluses in that year that have been utilized to cover cost increases for some projects that are currently in the highway programs and also cost increases on some current transit funded projects. However, given that in recent TIP cycles, projects proposed by the MBTA were selected as fill-ins in those years, staff are recommending that before any other new projects are funded in federal fiscal year 2025, that there be about $8.3 million of Regional Transit Authority projects funded in there, which includes bus procurements for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority and Cape Ann Transit Authorities, projects for the modernization of the Cape Ann Transportation Authority's Gloucester facility, and the Framingham Blandon hub for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. There's also a small amount of money for CADA for $65,000 in dial-a-ride service fare improvements there. This figure is already baked in to the scenario 4A and 4B, as is about $20.75 million of additional funding to 3 MPO-supported MBTA projects in federal fiscal years 2025, including the Jackson Square Station Accessibility Project, the Columbus Ave Phase 2 Bus Lane Extension Project, and also additional funding in a form of about $6 million for the Reading Turn Track at Reading Station on the commuter rail. This also, if this $20.75 million is factored in with the $8.3 million and that list of $6.15 million of design projects, still leaves about $21.78 million in federal fiscal year 2025 to program new projects. So in addition to everything else today, there is also a request by the MBTA for this board to consider the funding of new projects. There are 5 new projects that were initially presented for consideration by this MPO, though there may be an opportunity to fund some additional bucket line items that would support other sorts of goals that the MBTA has that overlap with the MPO's goals. But speaking to specific projects first, these include the Central Square Station Accessibility Improvements Project in Cambridge, which is initially seeking $5 million and also potentially additional funding resources as well. This is the MBTA's #1 priority project for this board to consider for funding. There's also a similar accessibility improvements for the Pedal and Park modernization system at 12 to 13 stations across 9 municipalities, with a total contribution that is scalable of about $2.5 million. So that can be scaled down, omitting some of the electronic systems to about $1.5 million. There's also a rail modernization project for Fitchburg line improvements with a $14 million request, which would improve the Fitchburg line tracks near Weston in a similar vein to the aforementioned Reading project to enable improved headways there. The Mattapan Square reconfiguration project in the city of Boston near the border with Milton, which is requesting a total funding amount of $20 million, but may be scaled back down to potentially utilize certain amounts of funding under the Blue Hill Avenue raise grant that the city of Boston received, and also a $5 million transit priority project at Nubian Square for accessibility and operational improvements there in the city of Boston. For the projects based on the MBTA's readiness sheet that would be near-term, ready for delivery, that would represent a combination of funding for the Nubian Square, the priority project for Central Square, and also the Pedal and Park modernization project, amounting to $12.5 million, still leaving about $9 million on the table in federal fiscal year 2025. It's also important to note here that, again, additional funding could be voted to be applied above that $5 million for Central Square. And if any of these projects are not selected by members here today, there is an opportunity that during the TIP universe discussion for next year's TIP, members of this board or the TIP committee could ask that the MBTA, MWRTA, and the Cape Ann Transportation Authorities formally apply for projects to be considered in that TIP cycle, potentially including projects that aren't selected here today. I may need to go on the next slide again. I think the clicker may have died on me. Thank you. In addition to some of the fill-in projects for the MBTA, given, as I just mentioned, the priority near-term readiness amounts to about $12.5 million, there is the opportunity for additional funding of MBTA projects using that $9 million, but there are also some MassDOT highway projects that MassDOT has asked that the MPO consider for regional prioritization. There were 3 projects initially presented, including one in federal fiscal year 2026 in Medford for some ramps at Mystic Ave. That said, there's insufficient funding in 2026 to support that project, so it has been omitted from this list. The 2 projects that are under consideration are both currently funded in the statewide highway program in federal fiscal year 2025 of the 25 to 29 TIP for that program. These would be the Stratton School Improvements projects in Arlington for safe routes to schools to improve multimodal accessibility near Stratton School for vulnerable users, and Medford's shared use path extension at the Route 28 in Wellington underpass for about $4.4 million. Should the MPO fund these projects, MassDOT may be able to incorporate similar projects in their stead for their 2025 statewide highway program, though, while staff requested, a list was not made available to staff to see what those potential projects could be. I think there may have been some out of office. And again, this is just one other item for consideration in federal fiscal year 2025, which may come in addition to other forms of transit projects or priority. If we can go on to, and then the next few slides just to go into a little bit more detail, list each of the projects, including the existing ones for Tremont Columbus, accessibility improvements at Jackson Square, rail modernization for Reading Turn Track, and we can go back to each of these should there be specific questions as they emerge during discussion. Accessibility improvements at Central Station on the MBTA Red Line in Cambridge to specify. Station access and accessibility improvements for Petalin Park. Rail modernization for 30-minute service headways on the Fitchburg line by making improvements to the rail at Kendall Green. And last but not least, the Mattapan Square, oh, I'm sorry, there's also Nubian after this, the Mattapan Square reconfiguration in the south side of the city of Boston, and then also Nubian Square accessibility and operational improvements in Nubian Station and Roxbury. So that was a lot of information, and I will now try to summarize everything in there for each of the different items that staff are requesting decisions from on the MPO board for a final scenario. So here are the decision points. First, there's the question as to whether or not all or just some of the federal fiscal year 2025 community connections applications should be funded. The current scenario assumes that all of those applications would be funded. And just to rattle them off very quickly, that would include new bicycle racks for the city of Boston, the town of Scituate, and also the town of Arlington, bicycle expansion for the Blue Bike system in Revere to the Northern Strand, a new joint microtransit project by the cities of Chelsea and Revere across federal fiscal years 2025 to 27, and bike share replacement projects for the first round of bike share support funding for the city of Boston, town of Brookline, city of Somerville, and city of Cambridge. There, that amounts to about $2.7 million of community connections funding. There's then the question to fund all or some of the federal fiscal years 2025 to 26 RTA projects. Those are that $8.3 million of funding that, again, are already factored into the scenarios in advance to be funded in full. Those being $1.98 million for the MWRTA to procure their first 29-foot low-floor buses using low-emission compressed natural gas vehicles, MWRTA to receive $2.5 million to redesign their Blandon hub, again, design funding only there. Cape Ann Transportation Authority for $1,293,000 to modernize their Gloucester bus facility, and about another $2.5 million there for the replacement of their 4 vehicles, I should say, with battery electric vehicles that have reached the end of their useful life, and then $65,000 for fare upgrade systems for their dial-a-ride service. There's then the question of a preferred alternative, to go back to the very beginning here, for the federal fiscal year 2027 deficit resolution, namely selecting between scenario 4A or 4B, or, should neither of those scenarios be to a member's preference, an amended version of either. There could then also be, for item 5, whether a vote around whether the 6 projects selected or recommended for consideration for that $6.15 million of design project funding are ideal. Again, that could also be amended. And whether or not $3.05 million should be programmed in federal fiscal year 2026 to support the initial development of 2 projects in the Destination 2050 Long-Range Transportation Plan. I didn't realize I didn't have a slide after that. So with that, happy to field any questions.
Good, because I have one. I have a question. Do we have to take them in that order? Is there like something like each one of them is going to trigger decisions? I don't think the answer is yes, but I need to know.
So the initial consideration was that these could all be voted on all together in one scenario bundle. Most of these are in separate years from each other. And as noted, items 1, which is the community connections item, items 1 and 2 are already baked into the scenarios. So if there are objections there, they could be sort of factored into everything else.
Yeah, but if not me, but if for some reason we didn't fund all the community connection ones, that just leaves a cushion in 25. It's not like it's going to affect the scenarios.
Not significantly. If there were to be removal of any projects from there, it would increase reserve funding in each of those years.
Yeah,
The
so-
only other difference being the microtransit project, which is funded across 3 years.
Yeah, so let me be clearer. If I wanted to go to scenario, to item 4 first, because I think that's what most people who are online and possibly in the room, other than those of us who are here to decide all these, care about, is that a problem?
Nope, I'll field any question.
Excellent, excellent. So, Ethan presented 4A and 4B. Anybody have any discussion on 4A or 4B they'd like to have at this time? Ethan, remind us what, you want me to remind us what 4A is? 4A is Woburn moves out, no new projects in 29. 4A is Woburn moves out to 29, partially funded because it's advanced constructed, and the 3 new projects are Bellingham, Ipswich, and I can't remember the last one.
Sudbury, Bruce Freeman, Phase 3.
Thank you.
If
Sudbury
we could go back to
would all
slide
be
36.
partially funded.
Yeah. Slide 36 in this deck, I don't know if somebody can jump to that slide directly, goes back to the scenarios to lay out the fiscal constraint results for each of these. Starting with scenario 4A, formerly called 3E, apologies for my numbering system, and then scenario 4B being those 3 new projects as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I can't tell who's, oh, it's Brian. I know who you are. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Ethan, I missed some of that. Can you start at the beginning and repeat everything, please? No, seriously, I wanted to just express my gratitude to you for pulling all this together. This is literally hurting cats, and you're well, I guess figuratively, but you did a great job. And I also just wanted to express my gratitude to Jen Rowe and everyone on the Tipper committee. It seems like that process is working as envisioned and allowing that committee to get more into the weeds on some things and making recommendations. And I just really wanted to express my gratitude to Jen and everyone on that committee for all the hard work that they do. This is not easy. And this is literally, we're seeing the sausage being made in public. It's not easy, but you guys do it very well. You folks do it very well. And I, for one, just am very grateful. Thank you.
Eric?
Ethan, in 2030, how much estimated money, federal funding do we have?
So until we have the MARPA meeting next year, we can't make an exact number on there, but if we assume level funding from last year, which usually there's an inflation factor on top of that, it's about 160 million.
160.
160.
And essentially, scenario 4B would be committing 85 million of that.
That would commit 85 million up from about what we're already considering to be 60 million.
Yeah, okay.
Based on advanced construction and the set-asides for community connections, bike share support, and transformation.
I mean, always happy to want to, program more projects. And I think that's, we want to get them in the queue and get them going. I also, at the same time, I just have the concern that we have, completely programmed like 29. I think there's a sense that projects might go up in cost, and we're just going to have a challenge next year where we are fully programmed, and we're probably going to be faced with some tough decisions. So I think that is the trade-off of we can do 4B, and we're kind of slicing this to make it happen. But we know next year we're going to have some tough decisions. I'd be really interested in what others think about it.
Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 4A or 4B, I hear you, Eric. 4A or 4B, we're still going to have tough decisions to make next year. And I think we're going to talk in the Tipper about our approach being to trying to make sure that we projects we have a good understanding of how projects are moving from year to year. I will go for 4B. The main reason being is that the Ipswich project could get some more funding if it's in the tip. And I know that score is pretty low, I think the main reason scores low, and one reason I was a little concerned about is that it has very little equity component to it. But the resilience factor is a big deal. I think that road needs to be there at least for the time being, unless we're just going to abandon it because of the flooding. And I think we need to plan to shore it up. So that's my compelling reason for opting for 4B at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Jay Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 questions, I believe. So, of the new projects that we're considering programming, I know a couple of years ago we revised our TIP criteria to new projects being at 25% design. So are all of those projects at 25% design currently?
Sudbury with Bruce Freeman Phase 3 is going to hit 25% design in June. With Bellingham, the scope was on track to hit 25% design over this past year, but it has been increased to use a shared use path and a new culvert widening to turn that into a bridge. So that is still only at PRC approval because they've had to make a scope change to avoid creating an entirely separate project for something. Argilla Road in Ipswich was in a similar situation there where in order to comply with Mass DEP requirements, they were approaching 25%, but then have had to make a scope change, so they're still not at 25%, but they are making progress on the environmental permits.
And so do the estimates shown here for those projects reflect?
They reflect, so in most of these cases, unlike with some of the projects we've seen this past year, those cost estimates are from PRC approvals from within the past 2 years. So they are less likely to have the level of volatility of projects that are only at a PRC approval from 2019. But again, that still does not yet reflect a 25% for those 2 projects.
So likely these are going to go up somewhat, maybe not dramatically, but they will go up somewhat.
Potentially, yes. And the other factor is this could go both ways, is that by utilizing advanced construction, it does create the possibility that those increases, depending on the readiness of the project, could be funded in either 2029 or 2030 for any of these projects, should they be realized.
Okay.
Alternatively, too, as was done or recommended for the Norwood Route 1 project in a future TIP cycle, should there be funding available in federal fiscal year 2029, that given year, projects could also be pulled up out of 2030 to be fully funded in 29.
Okay.
So there's some flexibility in both directions to account for.
Do you know offhand the total amount of cost increases we had this current fiscal year across the TIP?
The total, as in how much was above the initial level we had for our current projects?
Yeah, the difference between the total, 24 to 28 TIP last year to the 25 to 29 TIP this year.
I do not have that number exactly offhand, what that percentage is.
So, I share Eric's concern here that next year we could be in a situation where we're going to have to cut something. And there's a little bit of history here, too, for those of us who've been on the board for a number of years, that we used to program a 4-year TIP cycle. And in the situation, 6-7 years ago, we added the 5th year to get ourselves out of a bind. And I sense we're kind of trying to do the same thing here, trying to just push that calendar out some more. I'd love to be able to program everybody. I want to make sure that if we do so, we don't just stick ourselves in a boat next year that somebody's going to get cut. I think nobody here wants to cut anybody. I certainly support, the projects like Somerville, McGrath, and Rutherford, who got a haircut a little bit in 29 this year. We need to certainly fulfill those in 2030 to make them whole. But I think we just be careful with new projects.
Dennis?
That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. One is I'm leaning toward and probably supporting 4B. And the rationale that I have is that I think it sends the wrong message that we don't program any projects in a year. We're trying to get folks to bring their projects forward and now we're saying, well, we have a year that you're not going to have anything new. So I think that's a bad message. I think if we could avoid that, I think it's advantageous. I also think that one of the roles that the TIPA committee can play is to do a better job of maybe tightening the review process from both a scheduled dollar perspective, as well as to kind of push back. And we hear proponents come in, and they're going to give us the best story possible for them because they don't want their project to fall off. So I think we need to, as a committee, peel that back and be a little bit more probably thoughtful and challenging to some of the project's schedule and dollars early on, I think, so we get a better feel for it. Plus, at least from my perspective, those outer years are more of a statement for me than opposed to a hard fact commitment, because there's so many changes out there in 4 or 5 years, dollar-wise, delay-wise, and so forth. So I think it sends to me as a statement of where we want to go with them, but it's the proponents and the applicants that need to keep those projects on board, and if they don't, then they run the risk of those falling off. So I don't get into the debate of those out years as much because of those factors. So I think 4B, I think, is a better approach for a number of reasons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Here, Dennis. Others? Melissa?
Hi, thank you. So I guess at a very high level, I'm asking Ethan, I understand the implications on funding, but because I haven't internalized all of these projects, between scenario A and B, is there, a policy direction or something that is favored in one of these, or is this strictly about, the funding? If it can be, if there's a way to help me understand that, the difference.
Yeah, I can speak to some of that. So with regard to scenario 4A, by funding the cost, as has been kind of mentioned previously, by funding the Woburn Town Common project entirely in federal fiscal year 2029, that does leave less funding out of federal fiscal year 2030 as we anticipate that today. That said, we won't know for certain until TIP readiness days next February how 2030 will actually look. There's a possibility that any project in 29 today could get pushed back into that year. So again, scenario 4A assumes that there's no additional 2030 commitments beyond those advanced construction projects. Scenario 4B tries to balance the interest to offset, so as has been discussed at some recent board meetings and the TIPper meetings as well, and offset a trend of lower and lower project application volumes each year by funding what new projects are being received in federal fiscal year 2029, alongside accommodating that delay for Woburn Common, though doing so at the potential expense of about $24 million in federal fiscal year 2030. As we see it today, again, things are going to change over the next year.
Okay,
Go either
so I
direction.
understand that, thank you. And the person who just spoke before you, who was that? Right next to Tegan?
That was Dennis Jim Betty.
Oh, Jim Betty. Okay. Yeah. Well, I agree with his comments too, kind of scenario B. I guess in terms of the Woburn project, what are the impacts? Is there some likelihood it would not then get funded? If
No,
you
so-
split the funding like that in between the 2 years?
In the event where the project is funded or utilizes advanced construction across multiple years, the expectation is that it would be funded in full, along with any of these other projects, in federal fiscal year 2030, or if funding is available in 2029, once we develop next year's TIP, we could fund it in full then, as we have done with some projects in this year's TIP cycle.
Got it. Okay. I'm comfortable with that. Thank you, Ethan.
Tom Bent?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ethan. On the Woburn, I thought I had heard earlier that it would probably have to be done over multiple years. Is that correct? That we really, could we actually put it in 20, could it all be completed in 29? I guess that's my question.
I may need to defer to the project proponent.
Okay,
on
because that's what I thought I heard earlier.
For advanced construction, that requires projects to be funded across multiple years, but if anybody wants to speak to that in more specifics, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I'll take it. So you can always fully fund a project in a single year. Right? And that has, until we got into this position, has typically been our preferred alternative. The only reason you can advance construct a project is it has a construction season that is more than 1 year. So if a project like Somerville's McGrath Highway is going to take 3 years, you can fund it over 3 years. If Rutherford Avenue is going to take 5, you can fund it over 5. If Woburn's going to take 2, you can fund it over 2. So you can always do it that way, but you can't you can't use advanced construction for a project that's supposed to be a single-year construction. So my assumption is that given that this scenario is before us, someone looked at all of these projects and said, yeah, they're probably 2 construction season projects.
Okay.
Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ethan, we've talked about this kind of project pipeline issue, and I'm curious, in your opinion, do you see a project shortage in 2030, like that we will not have enough projects to really choose from or to program?
So, to be candid, in the past 4 tip cycles, or maybe 5, there's been a decrease since about the 2021 to 25 tip cycle, about 19 applications a year for the core investment programs. When I say core investment programs, I mean major infrastructure, complete streets, intersection improvements, and bike ped. Those represent 98% of the funding. That went down to a low of 3 projects this year and was at around 8 projects last year. It's been a pretty consistent decline. With only, I should say, 3 projects this year, there was a 4th that came in as a backup. With only 4 projects this year, there's not, knock on wood, a lot of room for that number to get lower, so it could increase more, but it is very unlikely that next year there would be a resurgence back to federal fiscal year 21 or even 23 levels when it was about 12 to 13 projects. And I note that in part, that was also relevant to the comment I made earlier with regard to the project design pilot, as while that is being used or was initially proposed as a sort of adrenaline shot to increase the project pipeline again, given when that contracting can actually start to take place based on the federal fiscal years, it is unlikely that any of the projects selected for the design pilot would actually be at a sufficient stage of design to even apply for 2030 anyways. It's likely, again, just to briefly answer your question, that yes, it'll be a low application year again next year.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to 4B. I just sense that's a trend folks are going. I think the one number I'm just still looking for is, and I know you don't have it today, that cost increase number, because that would tell us, I think, the likelihood or the order of magnitude of, you know, what we're going to have to fill in 2030. And so it would just give me a little more comfort if we had that.
Other comments? Jen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll say that I am also supportive of 4B. I think for me, the reason here is as Ethan has spoken to, we want to incentivize municipalities to be moving projects towards 25%. We know that takes funding, it takes dedicated staff time, all without the sure knowledge that they'll even receive the funding, which is the classic challenge we all know. So to kind of encourage folks to continue doing this, I think we do need to be able to fund new projects, and we also don't wish to defund projects that we have already committed to, but I think there needs to be an incentive somewhere that projects have to move along in design, because otherwise we're, consistently not having an open door to anything new. So.
Thank you, Jen. Any other comments?
I think Len.
Len?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Jay, I certainly understand your concern. And I guess a couple of years ago, I was advocating for leaving a big buffer. I lost that argument, and I understand the logic, of taking the other position of funding everything, and I am determined to make it work. And as Jen said, I think we need to stay with the proponents, year after year, to make sure that they are advancing their projects. And if we have regular, frequent conversations with the proponents, then there won't be a shock when we tell them you have to push your project out in a year or two, or maybe even more. And if worse comes to worse, we have to take it out. But we'll be having those regular conversations with people, and hopefully that will make it a lot less painful for everyone involved. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to express preference for scenario 4B. And I want to say that I kind of, agree with the point that Dennis G. and Betty made. We don't want to not accept projects in future years. And I know that in adopting a scenario like this, we're kind of putting us near fiscal constraint in future years. But, the TIPper committee that Jen has been chairing, I think, has come up with a solution where we can kind of evaluate projects throughout the year so that, we might be kicking the can right now, but at least we'll be having those consistent conversations like Len just said. So again, would like to express preference for 4B, and maybe the Tipper Committee and future meetings can kind of think about what that evaluation process is so that we're not consistently doing this year after year. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Oh, Melissa.
Yes, I'd like to move, Mr. Chair, to a vote on that item. Can we do that?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Like to move that we vote on, gosh, what item number is that? Sorry,
You
4B?
just want a motion to approve 4B, right?
Correct.
So Melissa has made a motion to approve 4B. Is there a second?
Diggins seconds.
Len Diggins seconds. Call a roll, please.
Call a roll to approve 4B. David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Glenn Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd,
Ned Codd, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Kristen Guichard.
Dennis Giambetti, yes. Sorry.
Sure, thank you. Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Melissa Tantakis,
Melissa Tantakis, yes.
Chris Diario, Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes. Great job, everyone.
That motion carries.
Thank you. Ethan, stand up again. All right.
Thank you, Ethan.
So I think we're going to do number 1 next because I think it's fairly easy. Can you quickly remind us what these projects are?
Yes, I will do my best. So this is about 10 projects for around $2.7 million in both community connections and the bike share support program, which is rolled into that. That is about $25,000 for Situate to procure 10 bicycle racks. The town of Arlington would be procuring for about $90,878, I think. 123 bicycle racks for 246 spaces. That's about $400,000 for 1,600 bike racks for the city of Boston. There's then bike share dock replacement projects for about 36 stations, I want to say, within the town of Brookline, city of Somerville, city of Boston, and also city of Cambridge. That is bike share expansion for 2 new Blue Bikes docking facilities in the city of Revere for the Northern Strand and near Griswold Park up in Revere. And then there is also a microtransit on-demand service pilot for the city of Chelsea and city of Revere to utilize electric vehicles for on-demand services for Chelsea and Revere, for workforce and other transit connections in there. That is about $500,000 a year for 3 years.
And this is all within our general target for community connections.
Yes.
All right. So unless there are any questions, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve this. If there are questions, please go ahead. No questions. Can I get a motion to approve this?
Eric Barassa, I'll make a motion to approve the community connections projects as presented.
I'll
Is there a
second that
second?
motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane, Brian Kane, Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd,
Ned Codd, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Kristen Guichard, Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tantakis,
Melissa Tantakis, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That motion carries as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I be recognized as a yes on that vote? Brian Kane? Sorry, I missed it.
Absolutely, Brian, no worries. Okay, either now on item number 2.
Yes.
So in FY25, what are the RTA projects?
So, and I'm just going to track them down on the scenario spreadsheet in case folks want to refer to them. So for the Regional Transit Authority projects, these were, oh, somebody changed the sort on this. Let me check what is exactly on the calendar versus what I have on my spreadsheet. They were previously listed at the very bottom of the spreadsheet. There are 5 projects listed there, 3 for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority and 2 for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. They are identical between both lists for scenario 4. And yes, you can find them in the bottom 5 rows on the 3rd page of the scenario spreadsheet. This is, again, it's small text, so apologies. The first project is the Metro West Regional Transit Authority's procurement of 3 29-foot compressed natural gas buses, which is the first set of full-size buses within the Metro West Regional Transit Authority fleet, and they're low-emission vehicles. There's then a project for $65,000 for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority for fare upgrades for Americans with Disabilities Act or dial-a-ride service customers. There is a Gloucester facility modernization project that is an implementation and construction project with the modernization including building weatherization, overhaul of their power systems, about 7 new garage doors on their vehicle bays, and then renovations to their plumbing, parking facilities, and other various state of good repair elements, and power supply improvements at their Gloucester facility for CADA. In a similar vein, this is design funding for about $2.5 million for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority for their Blandon Hub to create a new training and operations center to make their existing center also be fully accessible, and a new outdoor weather enclosed customer waiting area at their Blandon Hub, and then overhauls to their vehicle base to accommodate those new 29-foot bus vehicles. Again, this is design funding, and this would also help to support the MWRTA in some bids that they have recently been making to pursue federal discretionary grants to overhaul the facility for construction. And then in a similar vein to that compressed natural gas bus procurement for them, for the MWRTA, the Cape Ann Transportation Authority is requesting that the MPO get involved in an item that is actually currently on the tip, but is fully state funded to federalize the vehicle replacement for 4 vehicles that reached the end of their useful life in the CADA fleet, 2 of which were in 2022 and 2 of which were in 2021, to replace those using a contract they have, or options they have, with the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority with battery electric hybrid, I should say diesel electric hybrid buses there. That's about $2.5 million as well. So again, $8.3 million in total across 5 Regional Transit Authority projects.
Okay. And they have the match?
They have the match.
Okay. Any questions on that list? All right, you want to go over 26, and we can do this all as one motion, or I'll take it as 2. Let's take this one. Can I get a motion to approve this list for 25?
So moved.
Dennis Giambetti makes a motion, Eric Barassa seconds. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Cod,
Ned Cod, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
So for federal fiscal year 2026, the funding that was actually in that year was included. There is 700, so that 8.3 million covered 2 federal fiscal years, to clarify. There's about 1.5 million of that was split between both MWRTA and CADA. The Blandon Hub Equitable Redesign Initiative project that was mentioned previously was $1.75 million in federal fiscal year 25. There's an additional $750,000 that was in 2026, hence that 2.5 million figure. And then the vehicle replacement for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority has $1.71 million in federal fiscal year 25 and $750,000 in 26. So
Okay, so in effect, when we took that vote, we took a vote for 25 and 26. I just misread it. Thanks. All right, next one is item 3. That's MBTA and/or MassDOT projects in FY 2025.
yes, so these projects can be found if you refer on the scenario spreadsheet to any of the ones with an orangish peach color. They generally begin with the Central Square Station accessibility improvements on the list, and the MassDOT ones should be incorporated into there as well. I will also, I can go back on the slides to kind of, my clicker has been taken away from me. Thank you. We can go back just a little bit more to, so there's 2 different sets of projects to consider here. And again, with assuming that the design funding is at around 6.15 million, there's about $21.78 million of projects to consider in federal fiscal year 25. While this lists 2025 and 26, the only potential, given current fiscal constraint, to fund any new MBTA projects in federal fiscal year 26 would require a reduction in the transit transformation set aside. So there's about 21.78 million in federal fiscal year 2025, and if board members would want to reduce the federal fiscal year 26 transit transformation set aside, there's about $5 million there, though that will reduce the opportunity for future application rounds of transit transformation to take place.
Sandy?
Mr. Chair, can I clarify one thing about one of these projects before we start?
Of course you can.
Yeah, so just on Central Square, since Ethan had mentioned that we had been seeking additional funding, I believe we are no longer seeking additional funding. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe that we have a CIP set aside for the remainder of the funding for that project.
Okay, so that's great. So that 5 million that was your number 1 priority, you think is now funded through your CIP? Is that what you're telling me?
No, the total need.
You still need 5.
Yeah, we still need 5. The total need was 10. I believe there's 5 in the CIP, and we are only asking 5 from the MPO.
Right. So, but I do need clarification because I think we're giving you 4, right? I think we're giving you 4 and the match is 1.
Yes, correct. Sorry,
Okay.
5 million total.
Okay.
We'll provide the match at 20% as usual. Yeah.
So how much money's in 25, Ethan?
So assuming that there's about 6.15 of design, it's about 21.7 million in 25. Assuming the 10 million of design, which is high bound, it's more like 17.
All right. So does anybody have a preference for any of these projects other than the Central Square one, which is the MBTA's number 1 priority, is ADA elevator related, and I sort of promised Sandy we were good for it. So does anybody have any other priorities besides that one that they would like to discuss today? Because Ethan, it's also true that we could just do that one and leave $20 million or whatever it was unprogrammed for now, given people's concerns about cost increases and other things.
That is also a possibility in fiscal 25.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not saying I think we should leave $20 million unprogrammed, but Sandy, I'm putting you on the spot so you can answer no. Does the MBTA have a priority amongst? I know we've got number 1 up top, but amongst the others, does the MBTA have a priority?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good question. Yes, I would think Nubian would be our top priority among the remainder of the projects. Certainly the Pedal and Park is a priority as well. That's a relatively small dollar amount. We could also come back if there was a need for the MPO not to program that project for a community connections application for that in the future. Mattapan is obviously a very high priority for us, but just the way the puzzle pieces have fallen, it's such a large number that it doesn't seem to fit right now. I know one approach that has been broached in the past, and recognizing there's potentially some additional funding available here, has been to put things into some buckets, kind of toward a transit priority bucket that could be utilized on parts of the different projects when we in the municipalities get an alignment on design, which in some cases is not fully the case yet, or potentially toward a regional rail bucket. That the Weston project also is probably larger than would fit the available funding, but there are some other projects that the MPO has been asking about, regional rail early action type improvements, and we certainly have a few that we could put forward in that bucket.
So Sandy, can I ask you to do me a favor? Why don't you make a motion that the MPO funds Central Square, Nubian, and Petalin Park, and you can choose if you want the 2.5 or 1.5. I don't actually care.
Very good. All right. I will make a motion that the MPO provide funding to the MBTA for at $5 million, $4 million of federal funding and the MBTA match for Central Square, $2.5 million for Petalin Park, and $5 million for Nubian. And then after that, we'll make a decision about the remainder of the funding.
Excellent. I'm going to get a second, and then I'm going to take comments because I see people have their hands raised.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So there's a motion on the table. Discussion. I think Jim Fitzgerald, but it's hard for me to see that far.
That's correct.
Jim?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to provide more context and support for the Nubian Square MBTA project. I think as most folks know, many folks may or may not know, we've been working on Nubian Square roadway, complete streets improvements, and a lot of those design decisions have dovetailed with what needs to happen in the Nubian Square busway, which is a reversing of the circulation, and it really helps save a lot of travel time for buses, all the many buses that go in and out of the Nubian Square busway. Switching the way buses circulate in there is a key component of the Nubian Square complete streets transformation of all the roadways around it. And so we've been coordinating with the MBTA for years now on this project. It dovetails nicely with timing too for the city's funded street improvements that will allow for this change and improved circulation of buses and the rest of the kind of pedestrian bike roadway improvements that the city is doing for all the surrounding Nubian Square roadways around the Nubian Square busway. So I just wanted to provide that context and further Sandy's support of it.
Thank you. Brian Kane.
Thank you. I just wanted to second what Jim Fitz just said and suggest that we often talk about regionalism and region-wide supporting projects, and if there ever was, these are they. Central Square is on the red line, which connects multiple municipalities. The Petalin Park is across 9 separate cities and towns. We very rarely get projects that would touch that many. The Fitchburg Line project obviously goes through at least a dozen communities, and as does the Mattapan Square with Milton and other bus routes, and Nubian Square, obviously, which purports to be the largest bus facility in the country that doesn't touch a rail line. So these are all regionally very important projects. I would suggest we fund them all, and I'm grateful for Sandy and the team for bringing these forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Jim described, he even mentioned the word. I think the Nubian project would be transformational, which fits into our comprehensive transformation program. Although I realize the funds aren't coming from that program, it will still serve that purpose. But then, at least my question to Ethan, or maybe you, Mr. Chair, do we have the bandwidth to support the transformation projects in the next year or two? The human bandwidth.
I think the answer is yes. Sandy shaking his head is yes.
Okay, all right, because we are running into that issue with the design program, so I just wanted to make sure, because if we didn't have the bandwidth, then it'd be like, well, I would feel comfortable taking money from that program to support projects like this, so we could get us maybe more MBTA projects. So that's the only reason I asked, but we're all set then. I'm fine with what was proposed in the motion, and I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion has been made and seconded, so Any more comments? Seeing no more comments, call the roll, please.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Cod,
Ned Cod, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Steve Olenoff, yes. Patrick.
That motion carries.
Thank you. Ethan, now I've got 9.7, 7.5. What do I got left? Because I'm going to let the Highway Division now do the same thing I let the T do and suggest projects we might want to fund for them.
Yeah, we have about 9.28 million.
All right, 9.3 million bucks. John Bouchard, do you have any projects you want to ask us to fund?
I have two projects that are on screen. The Arlington Stratton School improvements, Safe Routes to School project at $1.62 million. And the Medford Shared Use Path Connection at Route 28 in the Wellington Underpass for almost $4 million. Those scenarios were presented. So I'd make that motion, please.
All right, motion having been made and seconded. Motion made by John Bouchard, seconded by Eric Barassa. Are there comments or questions for the Highway Division? Seeing none, please call the roll. Wait, I'm sorry, Jen Rowe.
Thank you. I was just curious to understand a little bit more about where these two projects are in their design. I know, in this cycle, we've seen some projects we've chosen as fill-ins increase in cost and then cause some disruption. So I'd like to know a little bit more about these.
John, can you give an explanation about design readiness for these?
Both projects are at the 75% design stage. During readiness days in February, we had concerns with Medford making it in fiscal 25, and we were recommending at that time, with some uncertainty, that we might need to move it to 26. But since that time, we've received a 75% design. We've gone through design comments with the designer, and we're confident that that both projects can be delivered in fiscal year 25. And I mean, we're at 75% design, so we're confident at this stage with the cost, and we monitor that as design develops, and keep our finger on the pulse to try and control costs as best we can.
Thank you, John. John Alessi.
I can also just add to the Arlington project that in addition to what John said, the town is also moving forward with, the right-of-way acquisition process. We have a plan to undertake that once we receive the go-ahead from the Right-of-Way Bureau, and all set on that end from the municipal side.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee, Sarah Lee, Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Cod,
Ned Cod, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Sorry,
Nguyen, calling Darlene Nguyen.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Thank you. Melissa Tentakoulis, I believe is not online anymore. Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Steve
And
Olenoff.
Sarah Lee is also a yes.
Sarah Lee is also a yes. Steve Olenoff. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if my memory serves, we're up to item number 5, which I think is design. Is that true?
Yes, but there is a revision based on the slide. If we could go back to that previous slide on the TFPC that's listed there for the Medford one, just want to confirm on that. Let me check some former slides real quick. So the initial list of projects that was provided there, the Medford Mystic Underpass, lists that at 4.3 million, though I am seeing a revised total federal participating cost now of 5.5 million for that. So I just want to confirm.
That fits though.
There we go. This clicker's dying on me.
Mr. Chairman, this is Brian Kane. Can I ask a question?
Sure, Brian.
How much is left?
Well, there's enough left that even if it's at 5.5, it still fits, if that's your question.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
I just want to get the exact numbers so we can punch in the sheet and get our.
Yeah, but I think you can get the exact number after this meeting. It's okay.
I'll move approval at 5.5 if that helps, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. We're going to take a big vote on this on the 18th anyway. This is really just sort of giving staff the authority to do stuff, I think.
Right, that leaves about 2.15 in federal fiscal year 25.
Excellent. So now put up the one that has the items on it. I think we're on item number 5 now, I believe. Right. All right, so where on this sheet can I find the design projects?
So the design projects can be found, they are spread out, unfortunately, but they are organized in section of investment program.
Got it.
So you can find the Framingham Chris Walsh Trail and Norfolk Rentham Walpole shared use path installation on page 1, next to one another. They are also grouped with Sudbury's Bruce Freeman Phase 3. You can find the separate Arlington Broadway Complete Streets design and the Granger Boulevard design under Complete Streets on page 2. That's also alongside Bellingham's Route 126 and Ipswich's Argilla Road projects. And then on page 3, at the very top, you can find Sherburne's reconstruction of Route 27 and Route 16, and the Halston intersection improvements at Route 16 and Whittle Street, next to the Willard Street and Rich Judy Drive project in fiscal 26, which was an application by Quincy, which is funded.
Okay. All right, so I have some questions, but it's 12:25, so we can keep going. I'm happy to stay. Obviously, I work here. It's easy for me. Or we can decide that we're going to push this off till next week. We're back here next week, virtual. I'm also happy to just start and we can decide in the middle that it's going to drag on if it looks like it's going to drag on.
Let's keep going.
All right. All right, so Ethan, I have a question first about, it looks like we chose 2, 2, and 2.
Yes, so this is 2 projects from each of the investment programs for the design pilot, Complete Streets, Bike Ped, intersection improvements.
And is there a reason?
Given, so the initial set aside that was proposed at the MPO meeting on March 21st of 10 million, staff received word from MassDOT that 10 million would fund more projects than there's sufficient capacity to do so under. 6.15 million is greater than the initial $4 million set aside, but less than 10. And enables about 6 projects to be funded, which may be more manageable. This also captures the highest 2 scoring projects in Complete Streets and Bike Ped. In the case of intersection improvements, it captures the highest scoring 1 project there being Sherburne, and then its partner project in Halston, as they're both Route 16.
Okay. Ken Miller, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things. One, just a question about who is providing the match for these design projects?
The matching funding in this case would be municipal match, as this would be a reimbursable contract.
Okay, that's fine. And just to say that, you know, both MassDOT and we at Federal Highway have experience doing this kind of thing. Any earmark in the past that was for design that went to a community, this is exactly the way that this kind of project has been, design has been funded in the past, and we have experience doing this. I did have a question though about the criteria. I echo what the chair said about, you know, why picking two from each category, given that one of them has a, you know, very low score. But the criteria seem to be related to only about the value of the project itself, not about the ability of a community to actually fund design. Was there any consideration in thinking about that as a criterion?
Yes, so what is shown on screen here is a composite of different factors. Naturally, we're indicating proximity to transit and housing and when the latest TIP project was. That kind of goes two ways. One, if a municipality hasn't had a TIP project in some time, this kind of resource may help them to get on the TIP for the first time in a while, but it also may be used as a proxy to indicate what their relative experience may be in moving a project through the regional prioritization program. As we were developing the design pilot and soliciting applications for it, staff met with each of these municipalities one-on-one to discuss expectations, particularly with regard to the fact that this would be a reimbursable contract, meaning that municipalities would need to have some of the money up front. Each of the applicants indicated that they would have a path forward to find that local match for the project at the time of contracting there. And they indicate that in their applications.
So I think there's a flip side to that question that Ken might have been asking. There is some thought that this program should help communities who do not have the wherewithal themselves to ever raise the money to do design projects to get in the TIP. That there's a whole host of communities who aren't accessing the TIP because they don't have money. Then there's other communities who clearly do have money because they're getting in the TIP and nonetheless have requested additional funds for design. I'm not saying I think either one of those is right. I'm just asking, did that enter in? And I think that was actually Ken's question, because our assumption is
that's correct.
People sent the money. If the people sent their application in, they said we're good for our match. The question really is, did staff consider whether people, you know, whether this should be a program that is trying to help communities who would not otherwise have the wherewithal to get in the TIP, I think
yes, that was thank you, David. That was exactly what I was getting at. And also, just one other thing, the criteria related to access to transit and concentration of housing, sort of by definition, sort of leaves out these small rural communities that may not have the resources, and not only money, but also staff and knowledge to be able to put in an application and get a project done. So I'm just curious about that too. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So on this list of 6 projects here, so to go to the transit question first, 3 of the 6 projects listed here are not directly served by transit in their communities or do not directly incorporate transit investments. There is one community that is not currently being served but would incorporate transit amenities if that opportunity became available. Of the other communities, they are all either MBTA bus served communities, or in the case of Framingham, a combination of regional transit authority bus service and commuter rail in that case. With regard to whether or not MPO staff looked to projects that were in communities that were actively engaged in the TIP or less engaged, that was one of the priorities that had been indicated last year in the development of the project design pilot, as there's both a need to demonstrate that the project proponent is familiar enough with the MassDOT project to successfully execute, while also being able to champion municipalities that may not be as engaged. Using that latest TIP project figure here, there is a demonstration that there are multiple communities on this list that may not have had a TIP project in recent years, but have been engaged in other ways. For example, in the case of Arlington, while they have not yet been on the TIP since 2014, they do have a federal earmark right now for a complementary project for the connection of the Mystic River and Minuteman Bikeway, so they are already actively engaged with MassDOT in trying to advance design and have that kind of expertise there. We worked with various municipalities and also spoke with MassDOT and the highway districts as we were developing this to try to figure out how to balance that, as it's also important to note that while the regional prioritization program is what we are showing for the latest year of the TIP project, some municipalities are quite good at delivering projects in-house with their own local dollars. Some work quite well with MassDOT Highway. But as this project list also shows, there are 3 municipalities in here that have not been on the TIP since before 2010, and some in excess of 10 years. Assuming we're looking at a 25 to 29 time band, most of these municipalities will not have had a project in 10 years by the time these design projects are coming out for construction, with the exception of Rentham, given the 495 and Route 1A project they had. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, a couple of questions kind of along the lines of what we've been discussing. So with respect to the match, I mean, so Ethan was mentioning that the communities have the ability to meet the match. What is the alternative, if they can't meet the match?
If a municipality cannot provide, so to describe in more detail what we mean by a reimbursable basis, if a municipality is successfully selected as part of the project design pilot, they would be able to invoice their billing for design services. And I'm not an engineer, so I may not have the particulars all the way down, but they may be able to invoice they may be able to submit any of the invoices that they receive from their consultant for billing for that design to MassDOT, and then be reimbursed for that funding about 30 to 60 days from there. At the end of the contract, they will have been reimbursed for about 80% of the total costs. Right now, those municipalities, were they to go through the TIP, would need to find some form of 100% of the local matching funding. Many municipalities do that through a combination of either local tax funding like town meeting, Chapter 90, or they may try to pursue things like a MassWorks grant or a Mass Trails grant, for example, for that. So each of these municipalities has demonstrated that through some combination of resources, they should be able to attain that funding. If they cannot muster that funding to meet their reimbursement deadlines, design may be stalled, or the contract, worst case scenario, as has happened with some projects on the TIP for construction, may need to be pulled back. That's worst case scenario.
All right, thanks. And then another concern, I mean, is with respect to having more projects. I mean, apparently there's a bandwidth issue with respect to MassDOT staff. I guess I was a little surprised at that because I thought the design was going to be outsourced, but there is apparently some element of MassDOT that needs to be involved. So that seems to be one big reason for why we're not having more projects, because it seems like we have the funding for it. So is that correct, Ethan? And then what could we do maybe to get more projects, especially for those smaller communities?
So I would also like to just note that this is a multifaceted capacity concern. So while MassDOT is one factor, with regard to the full 10 million, as Ken mentioned earlier, there are already multiple design contracts in the form of federal earmarks that are going to municipalities that MassDOT is already working to administer with those municipalities. Each of these projects, some of these are already through Project Review Committee approval, will also have a MassDOT project manager assigned, which represents a different facet of where constraint may emerge, and also MassDOT within the Office of Transportation Planning and MPO staff will need to be able to administer the contracts and make sure the funding is also flowing. And then there's the matter of capacity at the municipal level to oversee the contracts. So even though they're being outsourced, so to speak, to a designer, we still need the municipalities to be able to stay on top of their designer and make sure the submissions are being made on time. But there needs to be project managers to make sure that those submissions are being reviewed and then sent back if there's need for any revision. And there needs to be folks in the contracts office, Office of Transportation Planning, and at the MPO to make sure the money is being not only reimbursed, but also that these designs are making solid progress and that this pilot can be successful. So this is multifaceted, and that's why it's kind of coming up there. We are currently already working with these different stakeholders to make sure that this pilot may work so that we can take the lessons from it and then improve it in the future and either make it a long-term fixture and or expand it if it's successful.
Yeah, one more quick question on these lines. So is there a problem then with a lot of small projects? So does smaller projects require a level of bandwidth that makes it harder for us to fund a lot of small projects versus a couple of big projects in terms of design? Thanks. And that'll be it, Mr. Chair.
Yes, so that's a very good question. So with regard to multiple smaller projects that can be more difficult, in the case of the Route 16 project, as was noted, that is a case where there are two municipalities working together as they are both very close to each other on Route 16. So while the Holliston project is $250,000 for design and $2.5 million for construction, that does still require a certain amount of staff time to monitor that and that progression. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the microtransit pilot projects within the Community Connections program are one example where having many small projects could present a bit of an administrative constraint. So we are mindful of that. That same rule also applies to other kinds of projects in the Community Connections program. And we're taking our lessons from trying to administer $10,000 bike racks and the amount of staff time that takes as we try to make improvements here as well.
Thank you, Ethan. Rachel?
Hi, I'm from Rentham, so one of the people on this list. I don't know as though we had the option to not have a match when we were applying either. So that was also why a lot of these communities have a match and are putting up that 20% match.
Right. This is federal funding, so it is required to have a match. It could be state match, but in this case, it would be local match.
Yeah, and I would also say, as somebody that's worked in, probably industrial parks with not a lot of access to walking, and I'd want to walk during lunch and not have to go out, not discounting the fact that, it may be a commercial site, but, there's people that work there, and that also reduces the amount of traffic on these small sort of roads as well. So that's all.
Dennis?
Yeah, Ethan mentioned what I was going to say, but I just wanted to reiterate, if I could, is that this is a pilot, and that we set it up as a pilot, and that we're going to have lessons learned, and there are going to be some things that we made a mistake on, we overlooked, but that's the purpose of the pilot. So I think the project has defined and kind of gives us a good mix, and will give us a good mix of how we want to learn those lessons in each one of those categories.
I have another question. These cost estimates seem low to me. Who developed these cost estimates for design?
Good question. So different municipalities develop them differently. Some did so in conjunction with some of their local on-call consultants, either given recent work that they may have done with MassDOT, or some municipalities, there was one project not listed here that they used that as an example. They used a MassDOT cost estimation tool that is published online. I did note earlier, some municipalities only asked for enough for 25% design, but then revised upwards in coordination with their consultants to ask for enough for 100% design. So each of the figures being shown on screen here also illustrate the cost estimates and design requests to take these projects to 100% based on the consultants that the towns may already be working with, either for conceptualization, on-call contracts, or the recent experiences that those municipalities may have had.
And do you know the construction cost estimates of these projects?
Yes, so if members are interested, some of these projects do have cost estimates listed while they are not present on this slide. If you refer to the project scoring summary sheet, which I will now need to pull up for my own edification there, each of the design projects that were under consideration for the project design pilot were asked to consider incorporating what they believe their construction estimates to be are. If you also refer on that project scoring sheet to the current design stage that municipality may have attained there, some of those projects reached project review committee approval, and that may be why they had a more mature or a more specific number there.
Right.
I'm currently trying to.
So let me just ask a question, and I'm only picking the first one I came to, okay? Framingham has a project that's $14.3 million that they think 100% design costs $850,000. Is that true?
That was the request by the city of Framingham for phase 2. There's also a phase 1 that they have an earmark for that they are already
Right,
running
but
underway.
presumably the okay, don't say that because that's not true. But the $14.3 million is for presumably phase 2. And I'm only picking Framingham because I saw it first. I could do the same thing with Rentham and $2.5 million of construction for $250,000 of design. Or not Rentham, whatever that one is. Holliston. So did you do any analysis of what's the percentage of design to the construction total?
When staff were engaging with project proponents for the project design pilot, we did factor that in our requests and confirmation of costs for some of these municipalities. For example, we had one municipality initially ask for, this isn't the Holliston project listed here, but they also asked for about $250,000 for what they believed was a $2.5 million project. We then followed up with them. They stated that they got that estimate from the MassDOT cost estimation tool. They then went to a consultant, got a revised estimate, and that increased to about $800,000. So yes, we did try to confirm that and assuming that about 10% of the construction cost may usually reflect the design cost. If there were severe outliers there, we tried to follow up on that. The figures that are present here are either what the municipalities think they need in full to get to 100% design, or it may just be a request that they are making. Because it's also important to note that some municipalities may already have MassWorks grants or anticipate that they've already got other sources that they can utilize. Some, for example, in order to appear more competitive, may have indicated that they would, rather than pay 20% of the match, cover 40% of the match. Though in this case, that is, or I should say, that is not the case for any of the ones listed here, I believe.
Not including the match. I don't know.
Does this design request not include the match?
This design request is match inclusive. So
It is match, okay.
yes, so this factors in the 100% total federal participating cost of each of these design contracts. About 80% of the amount of money that is seen here, the municipality will be reimbursed for. The remaining 20% is the local match baked in. Same policy as we take with the Community Connections program.
And you just said that some of these projects might also have additional design funding, like for some of the trail projects, like MassWorks and things like
Some
that.
may pursue that. Some have already expended some grants to get to the conceptual stage. Many of these projects are at very early stages of design, but some may have already done, for example, a few years ago, like a concept or strategic plan that this was incorporated in. So each of these projects is different, but in each of these cases, we have a reasonable belief that they will be able to advance through the MassDOT process. A few of these, like Marlboro's project, for example, are already through project review committee as well.
So what happens, and maybe I could, Rachel, I could ask you, what happens if you guys are like, oh, we need more money for design? Do you feel confident that you could find that at the local level? Or I'm just worried that, given where our tip is right now, we don't have anything else, and want to make sure that these projects don't get along in design and then can't move forward.
So Rentham, I can only speak for Rentham. I'm sure Rich and Zach could speak for Norfolk as well. We had just finished a 2-year robust master plan process, and throughout that whole master plan process, it was clearly understood by staff and that the town wants more trail, more walkability, more access to amenities, open space. And this town Rentham shows up for that, to support that. We have a very robust recreation committee as well, and so people show up. For our match, we're doing a CPC application, community preservation application, and we've also used that to do feasibility studies for the portion that goes through Rentham.
John Bouchard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of things on the 6 projects that are up for this design pilot. Only 2 have gone through MassDOT's project review committee at this point. So the cost estimates, are subject to interpretation and, by my team when we do that. But I want to echo back to Dennis Giambetti's comment is that this is a pilot. We're trying to initiate something, and we're going to have some growing pains. And my team is supportive of working with the communities to make this happen.
Thank you, John. Sarkisian.
Yes, good evening. Sarkis Sarkisian, Director of Planning Community Development for the City of Framingham. Thank you, MPO Board, and Ethan, great presentation. To address the design question, we, the City of Framingham, is committed for the Chris Walsh Trail. We have several large multifamily projects that are before our boards right now, and any additional funding we will be able to secure regarding design funds. So I just want to make sure you guys understand we are confident that we will have available funding to complete this project. Thank you.
Other questions? Jay Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, this is for 25% design funding, right? It's not for full design up to?
For 100% design.
Okay, okay. Good, thank you.
Yep. So, Sarki, can I ask you a question about phase one? Because, it says phase two here.
Yeah, yes, sir.
What is the current status of the Chris Wells Trail phase one?
Phase one right now is actually 25% designed.
That's 25% design submitted to MassDOT?
Has not been submitted yet, but it's under 25% design.
Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? Sandy?
Just one quick comment to urge any of the projects that do go forward with the design pilot to please coordinate from the ground up with your transit provider, whether that's the MBTA or one of the RTAs. We love to get involved in design at a very early stage so that we don't have to come back and mess around with it later. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the 6 projects as outlined for $6.15 million.
Is there a second?
Rachel will second.
Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane. Calling Brian Kane. Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald, Jim Fitzgerald, Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd,
Ned Codd, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tentopoulos, Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. One final item, which is the design funding for the 2 RLRTP projects. So I have a question. Why didn't these just come in through the design pilot?
For federal fiscal year 25, good question. So
I know it is.
So the initial set aside for the federal fiscal year 2025 project design pilot was $4 million. As when that amount was carved out in the last tip cycle, we didn't know if there would be a funding surplus in federal fiscal year 25 and 6 in this tip cycle. Given the very, very strong interest that was expressed by multiple municipalities in fall of 2023, when the 2025 design pilot was being developed, staff had been advising some of the project proponents for these projects to potentially consider either lower cost projects or holding off so that they would not crowd out potentially other smaller projects in federal fiscal year 2025. Reason being, given there's about $3.05 million of design here for early design stages, not even to get to 100%, that would have crowded out the opportunity for most of those other design projects to advance in the 25 pilot. Moreover, given these are long-range transportation plan projects and they are larger and more complex, the lessons of the federal fiscal year 2025 pilot would be more beneficial to make sure that a large-scale construction project, like the many ones that are on the tip already, could advance apace in its own design submissions to MassDOT. That said, in about February of 2024, once after the tip readiness days, funding availability became clear there was an indication due to some, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, some overlapping stakeholders on the consultant side between some of those that are working on these projects and the ones that had outcomes from readiness days that prompted the project proponents to indicate renewed interest in potentially pursuing design funding in federal fiscal year 2025. Staff also made sure to note, though, in those discussions with project proponents that federal fiscal year 2026 funding would prevent those projects from potentially crowding out the other smaller projects in the design pilot, given there were already 14 applications in 2025 and insufficient funding to cover those 14, but also to provide an additional year beyond for these projects to gather more information about them, do more public engagement, so that they could then be formally rescored in the 2026-30 TIP cycle. These projects were already scored as part of the development of the LRTP, Destination 2050 last year, using the LRTP scoring criteria, but by programming them proactively in 2026, they would not have the same contracting timelines as those other design projects and may benefit over the next year from developing their projects further from some older designs that are on the books right now.
All right, so then I want to ask my same question about, good answer, by the way. I want to ask the same question about my other question about design. Who came up with these project cost, with these design cost estimates?
Good question. So the $1.4 million for Framingham's request reflects a nearly identical ask from a collaborative application that the city of Framingham did with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for about $1,380,000 for the Federal Reconnecting Communities Grant Program for more preliminary design work to get it towards 25%, but also to focus on updating concepts and public engagement work given recent land use changes. The $1.65 million from Lexington came from, so Lexington has an ongoing relationship with VHB as they've been developing this project in tandem with MassDOT District 4. VHB provided a recent updated estimate for $1.65 million to get the first stage of the project to 25% design. So this is not, while the map on screen, which is the left map, shows the full Route 4 225 project, this is that part in the top right that would be the Interstate 95 at 4225 interchange, and then part of Route 4 225. So this is $1.65 million for that part of this LRTP project to get to 25% there, based on VHB's estimate that they provided to the town.
Okay, so wait, now I got two follow-up questions.
Okay.
So it seems to me that what we're funding for Framingham is a planning study, not design. Is that true?
So this was a request for design funding, a portion of which can be updating the conceptual design to begin moving it towards 25% design and initiating it further.
Right, but after we fund this, we're not even going to be at 25% design. This is a planning study. This is go out and talk to people, develop some concepts on to some level of pre-25% design. Yes? And I'm not saying I'm still not saying I don't necessarily support it. I'm just trying to figure it out. It's not design, is it?
So it would update design and bring it to a preliminary design stage, but I would leave it to either.
So let me ask it another way. At the end of the day, when we spent this $1.4 million, what level of design are we at? 25 or less?
That would be.
I know the answer, so I know the answer. The answer is less.
So, okay.
Okay?
The answer
So that's all I'm trying to get to. And again, I'm not saying it's not a good use of our money. Maybe we want to do it anyway. But this is not design. This is a planning study, right? An alternatives analysis, maybe not even that far. Eric probably knows because he did the original scope. But this is not like the design pilot got us 100% designs. The Lexington one presumably is going to get to 25, although I have a question about that. But the Framingham is not to get to 25% design even, right? Yeah. Dennis, right?
So let me speak to that, okay? 'Cause
Okay.
we've had discussions about this project for a number of years, right? That it is on a long-range transportation plan. It is a critical rail system to the T, as well as to CXX and others. It is a bottleneck in this community for the last 100 years. It basically divides at grade through the central business district of this community. So the importance of this project is critical to come up with a solution to eliminate that at grade. We did a planning study, a conceptual design about 12 years ago, funded by the state, to look at that. As was stated, a lot of things have changed in the last decade at that site. considerable amount of housing has been put in, and other things have changed over the course. And I'll be quite frank that the alternative, or the preferred alternative that was established in that conceptual plan was not universally agreed to. There was issues around that. Although this body has kept it on the long-range transportation plan because of the critical nature of that. I've been advocating for a number of years to relook at that maybe folks were correct. Maybe the concept that was established over a decade ago may not have been the best method. Things have changed, so I think for the benefit of the state, because of the critical nature of that track, and this board, because it's on a long-range transportation plan, that we relook at that, and that we fund a planning or conceptual stage to make sure that what is going forward we can actually agree to, and if we can't, let's take it off the long-range transportation plan. Is no sense having out there if we can't get a concept that is agreed to, and having it there. So this is one way of making a determination whether we're going to go or no go. And this was a thought of how we want to go forward with that.
Thank you, Dennis. Mr. Johnson, do you want to follow up with Dennis?
Yeah, I'm just largely going to reiterate what Dennis had said, but I do want to clarify a bit more. It is more than a study. I've done a lot of studies, and we're not starting at ground zero here. We actually had a conceptual design. Things have changed, as you heard multiple times throughout here. If you want to put something to it, I think you can have a design that doesn't take you to 25%. Let's call it 10%. It'll certainly take us to something and reevaluate some of our assumptions. We're definitely not starting at ground zero. It is not a study. I don't know how you define each one of those, but my 25 years experience, I would not call this a study. I would definitely call it a low level or conceptual design to reevaluate what we know and build upon what we've been working on for the last 20 years of this project.
Thank you. Now I have a second question, because I'm just confused on the Lexington one. Is this design the interchange, or is this design not the interchange? I was confused by what you said.
Yeah, so I should clarify. So there's multiple different activities going on within this project. There's one that is already currently being studied by MassDOT. So there's a separate study that MassDOT District 4 has been doing for about $250,000, I think, to investigate this interchange which is the Route 4 225 interchange at Route 128.
Yep.
This interchange and the capacity there, if it were to be changed, would be the linchpin to enable additional changes on Hartwell Avenue and Wood Street. However, given there is only about a $250,000 study funded right now, the town is looking for funding from the MPO to utilize for design work in conjunction with MassDOT District 4 to begin studying the improvements to the interchange, its ramps, and potentially the Route 4 225 section up to the jug handle at Hartwell Avenue. So it is only about 1/3 of the overall roadway, but the main focal point is the interchange, which is really the bottleneck for all future improvements to this project.
Right. And just to be clear, VHB told someone that they could do an interchange design to 25% for $1.65 million.
So to clarify that, so I make sure I have the exact.
Please do, because I'm going to ask you for a name. I want to call that person. Go ahead, Ethan.
The town has.
I'll get to you, Sheila. I see you. I'll get to you. I'm just putting Ethan on the spot. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah. So just as the MPO staff were working with project proponents in federal fiscal year 25, that separate pool, to discuss whether or not the design contracts were valid, and many of those project proponents were working with some consultants they already had under contract, we asked the town of Lexington to identify a number that would get them to 25% design, and in conjunction with their consultant, the town and their consultant stated that $1.65 million may be a better, more revised estimate. That figure was provided a couple of weeks ago and was a revised figure from a previous estimate that they'd kind of pitched there. So there has been some analysis from VHB that led to this number, and it is a recent number.
Thank you. Sheila, do you have something you want to add or say, Sheila? If you do, please feel free. But introduce yourself for the record, even though I think we all know you.
Yeah, sure. Sheila Page, Town of Lexington. I'm the Assistant Planning Director.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that right now, VHB, we are designing, the town is paying for VHB to design from the southbound ramps through Bedford, the jug handle, up to the town line, and then Hartwell Avenue. And this ask now includes the entire interchange because we need the capacity to make Bedford work. And what else was I going to say? So, and it won't quite bring us to 25% design. I don't want to mislead the board here. What's critical is, so we did during the alternative analysis, it's showing that a DDI intersection will give us the safety, the efficiency, and the capacity that we need. But we need to know the integrity of the bridge, and that's a huge part of this ask. Will be investigating whether we can just repurpose the bridge and build the DDI, or whether we need a new bridge. And if we need a new bridge, that does change things substantially. Thanks.
Sheila, can you stay? And I have a couple of questions too. One is, and I don't know if you know the answer or if someone at MassDOT, is it typical that a municipality and their consultant would design like a MassDOT facility like this, like the highway interchange? It seems odd that would be.
That's a very good question.
But maybe District 4 is very involved?
District 4 is very involved.
Okay. I know we don't have anyone from District. I know John Bouchard has his hand raised. Maybe I could
Sure,
do you to the chair.
MassDOT District 4 is very involved, Eric, and my office, we've been partnering with the town of Lexington. MassDOT picked up some costs on some traffic work because they were originally only looking at half the interchange as part of their project. And, District 4, when they looked at it, said, we really can't assess all the improvements here without looking at the other side of the interchange. So, and it was outside the scope of the town's, initial project. So my team picked up that cost to do the traffic study on the other side and, engage VHB because they were the consultant for the town. And District 4 is very involved, but I think the repurposing of the bridge and the interchange and all this other roadway work, I believe, is going to far exceed the $1.65 million. And that was one of my questions at the initial when Ethan was presenting this, because it was not under the design pilot. It was funded under scenario 4A, 4B for, these long range projects. I think they're a little under scoped.
Okay. Okay, that's good information. Yeah, I have the same concern with these long-range plan projects. I mean, I think there's tons of merit here about trying to do something. It just that I think it does open this question of okay, this doesn't even get you to 25% design. Are we also opening ourselves up to be fully funding long-range plan projects? It does seem different than the pilot, these sort of smaller projects that we did. And so I have this sort of question of well, what happens next? Is this just to kind of get the ball moving, and then the municipality will take it from there? I know you guys don't want to design the highway aspects of this. But yeah, that's just my question, is sort of where, if we don't, are we in for a penny in for a pound, I guess is my question with the design commitment here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. I think it depends a lot on how the bridge is, whether we can reuse the bridge deck. We do feel that the $5.7 million that's set aside in the LRTP gets us close to building all the parts, including the DDI, without the new bridge, and of course we haven't done any of the wetland mitigation as well. The town's put in $3.25 million towards design. we are prepared to ask the town for more design money, 1.75 in later years. Town meeting has been warned about that, so they know that's coming. And so the hope is we can incorporate all of our design money to finish out the design. But you're right in that the construction of a bridge is not really included. We do, once we have 100% design, we are eligible for a grant from the Department of Defense because Hartwell Avenue ends at the Hanscom Air Force Base main gate. And then we've been working with, we've also had discussions with District 4 about doing a possibility of a raised grant, as well. And we have two very active landowners along Hartwell Avenue and Bedford, and so there's the possibility of a MassWorks grant. So we see that we're trying to bring the pieces together.
Okay. Sheila, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Other questions? Seeing none. Does anybody want to make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to approve both of these designs.
Is there a second? Rachel seconds. Please call the roll.
And then we're done.
Yeah, we're done.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Len Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Rowe, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald, John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Is there anyone else I have not called the roll for? With that, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, staff. Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? Jen Rowe.
Question. Did I mishear that there was like 2.5 million that's remaining in 25, or is that misheard?
There's about $2.5 million remaining in federal fiscal year 2025 right now.
Round numbers.
Yes. Because I guess I didn't know if that was something we might consider for a bucket of the type that the T was discussing.
I should clarify, it's 2.15, and
Oh.
that would bring us to zero.
Discussion of that until next meeting.
Okay, that's a little tight.
Yeah. We could. There are some of us who think we should leave money on the table, right? So we could have that discussion at 110, or we could not. And my preference is not, if that's okay with everybody. Thank you, guys. All right. So no member items. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
So move.
Second.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Great job, staff.
Great job, staff.